Da-da-da-da. Okay. Let's see how this is going to deal with this. Let's see how it's going to deal with it. Oh. Come on, girlie, you can do this. Good little laptop. Good little laptop, you can do this. So. Hello, everyone. Hello. Now, this is one of those times where I am mildly worried about what I'm going to do. I'm mildly worried about how it's going to go. But we will see. We can only try. And hopefully, we succeed. Hopefully we do. Now, you might notice that over in my right corner, there is a poodle, who is probably going to spend most of the time playing with Zia. He's still fidgeting with it. It's still not, well, it's actually described as being the reddest that the vet's ever seen. I will also say that this is coming from my laptop, and that's because the PC is, sadly, as some will notice by following the channel, it's broken. And whilst I'm hoping that possibly a USB boot will work to fix it, as to put it in the words of one of my shipshape colleagues, there's no beeps from the BIOS when it's starting up. There's no beeps from the BIOS. Which means it's very unlikely that's going to work. And that means that I'm probably looking at having to not only find a tax bill this month, the car going in for MOT and service, but also probably about the best part of £1,000 to £1,200 to buy new components for the PC. Basically, the hard drives look okay. The case probably will need to be replaced. The power supply unit might well need to be replaced, and the motherboard certainly does. And if you're changing the motherboard, I probably have to I'm probably going to change the CPU as well, because, yeah. Yes, the PC was killed by a book. Now, I'm hoping everything keeps up and everything works out, and the sound and everything is working at the same time as the screen, as the camera, so it's all sort of keeping up and all jointed. But I should tell you this, the laptop already sounds like it's about to take off. And if I change microphones as the camera, so it's all sort of keeping up and all jointed. But I should tell you this, the laptop already sounds like it's about to take off. And if I change microphones to the microphone, but as long as I use my mic, which is positioned in front of the camera, and in front of the microphone, in front of the computer, and is, how do I put this? A focused one. Then hopefully that sound shouldn't get involved. Video is a bit choppy. Yeah, this laptop is really not liking all the stuff it's having to do. The video is really not liking the laptop is really being to an extent overwhelmed by things. Are all the parts out of warranty, even mechanic? Yeah, they are. It's the laptop, the PC's 4.5, 5 years. It's roughly 5 years old. Roughly four, nearly 5 years old. So yeah, it's gonna be expensive. Timu, darling. I do love you put modern PCs without PC speaker won't have beeps. I connected in the speakers to make sure I could hear it. They also have lights and LEDs, which I did check the light codes for things. Accidental damage insurance doesn't apparently cover my computer. I did check. So yes, because it's a build my own computer. The laptop is just noisy. Yes. It's built in 2022. And it was, yeah, you remember, but it's roughly 4 years, so yeah, it's just over the mark. And the warranties were mostly 2-year warranties anyway. On time. So it adds up. It is, you are right if you were take, but it was during 2022 it was built, so it's adds up and it's closer to 4. Feels like 5. Ah, it's fun times. It's all fun. We'll sort it out though. We'll survive. We'll survive. But, you know, it's basically going to be a case of expensive month. Yeah. Honestly, I was up till 6 AM sorting this all out, so I do apologize, but the reason I'm doing this at the beginning is A, to allow people time to join, and B, to hopefully get an idea of whether or not the laptop's going to allow me to do this, or whether I should give up and just try and upload a video as a premiere at some point. But I think it's going to go okay. Currently it's running at 15% drop frames, which I'm not particularly pleased with. But yeah, I don't think there'll be long streams while running on the laptop. Which is lucky, because tonight's one is not really a massively long topic. It feels like it should be a long topic, but it isn't. McKinney, laptop probably just needs a new fan. Laptop does probably need a new fan, but and it's out of warranty, so I will consider removing it and replacing the fan. But I haven't got around to that. Usually laptop's my backup to my PC. Usually my laptop's backup to my PC, so it doesn't really matter. It doesn't usually have this load. At the moment, it's got a lot of load. It's also running a second screen because it has to, and it's, of course, doing restream. Because, thanks to the laptop, I might not be able to do the gaming stuff on Twitch. Because, honestly, this laptop and gaming on Twitch would probably kill it. Depending on which game I play. There is an external fan pointing in its general direction to try and help. Laptop's an old Acer Aspire. It's a nice one. It's an Aspire 5, so, you know. It's a good laptop, honestly. It's you know, aluminium parts of it, and it's got good Wi-Fi. It's a good, reliable laptop. It's what goes away with me around the world on the ship-shape trips. And it works very fine for around the world, but just, it's not good for, multi-stream broadcasting and all these other things. That's why this year the tech budget was hoping that the PC would last another year, and I could use the money to build up some money and buy a new laptop, because it's sort of reached. It's a little bit older, isn't it? Because this is about 2021, 2020, isn't it? Laptop. This. So then look at me go. That's not old. I'm not old. No, you're not old, are you? You're still a young puppy. Still a young puppy. Oh. Yeah, he does want a PT. He does know you're all there, and it's time for him to get it. He can go for a poodle treat. Yeah, you want the poodle treat, don't you? All right, so hopefully that's been enough of a welcome time for people who've joined. Hello, everyone. Put on a baking rack. Yes, it is on a yeah, Leslie, I do love the way you and I have the similar solution. Yeah, it's on. Actually, technically, it's not a baking rack. It's technically on a grill tray. from my grill pan. But we'll leave that to one side. It's the same thing. It's a metal mesh that it's held up on in midair. Oh, fun times had by all. So, coastal offences in World War II. Good boy. Coastal offences in World War II. And why did they fail to stop so many amphibious operations, and what could have worked better? Well, there's a quick answer to that. You don't launch an amphibious operation normally unless you're sure you're going to succeed, which means you're packing enough force to punch through whatever's there. But that's the point of coastal defences. And I'm going to start by going back to some very early coastal defences. These are Henrican coastal defences, we call them. The artillery forts of Henry VIII. Now, they're rather fun things, and there is a place not far from me called Falmouth. You were literally eating air then. Is this to try and make me give you more, or is it because you've got something stuck in your teeth? You're cute. Now, Henry VIII built these forts around the whole of the UK to deter invasion, but also to protect the anchorages of his fleet. And the important thing is, if ever you read of something called Carrick Roads in an Age of Sail book and whatnot, where is Carrick Roads? It's Falmouth. It's the anchorage in E. It's where there's a nice safe place for the fleet to go. Now, Falmouth is actually a terrible place to invade if you want to take over and launch an invasion of the UK if you invade England, because you're going to have to march up through the moors. Good luck. Bodmin Moor and Dartmoor will both abscond with your armies. Just look at the Civil War. They absconded with several English armies, let alone any others. And there's also the fact that it's really not going to give you a lot of space to maneuver around. But if you're basing a fleet from there to defend against invasion, it's a great port, thanks to the tides, thanks to the wind position, thanks to the general weather in the area. It's usually a good place to launch your ships from and get them out. They're going to usually be kept quite well and looked after quite well, and they're unlikely to be damaged. So it's a good place to work from. And this is an advantageous position. So because of that, you need to defend it. But the point is, this is not a place you want to that people want to invade, but it's a place where people want to will need to subdue, to destroy. So you want to make the cost of doing that as expensive as possible. And for this, you build Henry VIII builds 2 castles. He builds not 1, but 2 castles. 4 artillery forts. St. Mawes and Pendennis. St. Mawes is the one at the top. It's C on the map. It's a lovely place, St. Mawes, and it's a lovely castle. I would say it's one of the more affluent places in Cornwall to go to. And I would say that it's kind of it's a lovely area, but if you are going on holiday to Cornwall and that's where you're booking, you're laying down some serious money. You are. Falmouth, across the way from it, is which is a ferry ride across it, is the home for Pendennis. And Pendennis is the rather large one. Falmouth has the shipyards in it, which still to this day maintain the Royal Fleet Auxiliary and are crucial for them. It's where the fishing fleet goes in. It's where you have the lifeboat. It's where you have the museum. It's where you have quite a nice shopping street and all sorts of things going on there. What are you up to? Just being a poodle. Okay. It's a lovely place. It is a lovely place. But the thing is, whilst I have talked in the past, especially when talking about Admiral Kempenfelt, I've talked about the fact that people were considering invading places. Were considering invading Falmouth. Usually, they look at it and go, it's a port, it's defended, it must be worthwhile invading. But usually, the moment an admiral or a general of the French gets on to the French government and goes, have you actually considered the reality of invading this place? They stop. The point is, though, it's not even worth a raid. Because the damage you're going to sustain. And unlike Medway, Unlike other parts of the United Kingdom, which were the fortifications, Falmouth was traditionally quite well defended. The locals tended to keep an eye on them. Now, there were two reasons for this. One, the locals liked to keep an eye on them, because if they kept an eye on them, it meant that the central government didn't want to keep an eye on them, which made it far easier for smuggling. I mean, for creative business opportunities, isn't it? Creative entrepreneurial business opportunities. But I've got to get it right. Creatively taxed entrepreneurial business opportunities. I have to get it right. Okay? We have to get it right. Creatively taxed entrepreneurial business opportunities. Okay. When you're pursuing these particular opportunities, you want to make sure that the central government has as little reason as possible to cause you trouble. So you need to make sure everything has worked well yourself. Flexible bookkeeping. It's fun. Anyway, with all this being the case, these defences have been modernised throughout the years. Falmouth has never been invaded through, because A, there's no reason to go there, but people haven't even attacked there. It's been a target worthy of attack, but the value of attacking it versus the risk has always meant that, frankly, it's not worth it. Every time the risk has dropped below that level, they've upgraded the defences. That's why the Henrican forts ended up having these great big Civil War era ramparts built around them and various other things. And it's why they keep being defended. It's why, other castles which are besieged by parliamentarian forces in the Civil War have a habit of getting slighted and getting, things done to them. These weren't. These were maintained because they're of value. They're of value to the state, they're of value to the nation, they're of value in protecting Falmouth. And they raise the cost of attacking it. They make it expensive. They make it not worthwhile doing. And that's the whole point of coastal artillery and coastal fortifications. They are about the risk versus reward equation, and they're about raising the risk that the reward doesn't justify it. Or, alternatively, raising the risk level so that the only way you can achieve this is by using overwhelming force, which means you have to build up a lot of troops, a lot of personnel, a lot of ships. That's a lot of cost. So it's both risk versus reward and cost versus reward. Is the cost you are going to have to spend worth the reward? And can you afford that cost while doing any other operations you want to do? As far as you're concerned, as long as there are biscuits or squeaky balls, you'll go anywhere, won't you? Yes. Go on, get some sleep. You're supposed to still be resting. When did castles become military forts? About the time they started becoming castles were always sort of personal accommodations. They were either the royal castle or they were a personal noble's castle, etc. The moment they become places which are owned by the state, they become forts. The moment they become national assets rather than a personal asset, even a royal personal asset, they become forts, pretty much. To differentiate from the two. That's roughly, and it's not 100% always that way, but that's roughly the line we go with. Yeah, he did. Henry VIII did a lot of cannoneering and put a lot of cannons around the whole country. He was very concerned about an invasion, and he wanted to make it as costly as possible. You see, the thing for Henry VIII, the real problem for him was communications. And if he was going to position a fleet all around the country and ships all around the country, he needed to have secure anchorages to base from. He needed it so that those ships could not get ambushed in place. And that's where these bases come in. Now, some of them are also about deterring invasion and raising the cost of invasion, because, again, think about this. If you want to invade through Falmouth, if you decide you're really going to do that, you have to siege and take both Pendennis and St. Maur's. Which, by the way, means you are going to have to land on both sides of the Foul Estuary. Because you are not landing on one side of the Foul Estuary and walking around to get to the other. It will take too long, and by the time you get there, the enemy will have had weeks to do stuff. Because the terrain is a nightmare if you want to move siege equipment. If you're just walking troops around, infantry, that's great. But infantry will never take a castle by siege. You need heavy artillery for that, and that means you're going to need to move. You're going to need to land on both sides, because you are never dragging heavy artillery around the Foul Estuary. If you want to go have some fun, go look at it on a Google Maps, do in the sort of the topographical form, so you can see the elevations, and just look at what much fun that would be, trying to get heavy artillery dragged around the Foul Estuary. Yeah, that's a good way to kill your own troops, isn't it? Isn't it, Big Fluff? Yes, it is. Thank you for being subscribed for 7 months, Leslie. Thank you. So that being said, we move on. This idea continues, and again, I've used the UK as an example because I can go right the way through and show the UK's defences and its approach to it, and it's always about raising the cost. Why do the French think they need so much overwhelming naval power? Is it to just deal with the Royal Navy in the Channel? Is it? No. It's also to deal with the issues of what exactly what exactly would be getting up to, what exactly would be happening, how many forces they'd be running into, what kind of defenses they're going to have to deal with. You need artillery, you need ships to deal with that. Okay, Big Fluff. That's fun. With that all being said, the idea continues. And if you want a fun project, if you want to chart the early 19th century British Empire around the world, you can chart it by something we call Martello Towers, which are all based on this principle. And it was actually based on a tower which had caused the Royal Navy a lot of trouble when eventually taking a place, because it was just so frigging self-contained. It could be defended by a small number of personnel. And if there's any rain and things like that, they can basically stay there for as long as they've got food. And the idea is occasionally adapted. Occasionally you find there's more than one cannon. Sometimes there's a couple of cannons. Sometimes there's a dozen cannon with small arcs of fire. Sometimes they only have a crew of 20. Sometimes they have a crew of a couple of hundred. But around the world, you can chart the early 19th century British Empire by Martello Towers. They turn up in Australia. There was one in Sydney I went to see, and it was really, really cool. And I spent a while hunting photos, and I haven't been able to find it. Will you stop licking my chair, please? You are the reason my chair squeaks. No matter what I stick down there, you lick it off. And then it squeaks. And you can look as lovely as you like, but people find my chair squeaking annoying. But they have to know that you are the reason. I try and lubricate the chair. I try and do all the maintenance, and you lick it off. Yeah. You. And these forts, they are great. They are really cool. And by the way, during World War II, there were a lot of designs were looking to the Martello Tower principles of what's the smallest fortification we can make that's a self-contained fortification that can literally cause trouble for weeks. And a lot of the pillbox bunker designs, etc., that you find along the British coast are basically World War II variations of the Martello Towers. No, Tanef, I have never been winning versus the Poodle. I never claimed to be. This is probably one of the good reasons why I'm only a uncle to my little cousins, not an actual dad at the moment. I'm not sure I would ever be able to tell my kids off. I probably try and lead them by example because that'd be easier. But we'll see one. We'll lead it to one side. Ex-Samurai, why do invading forces feel the need to attack castles? Why not just go around and attack cities, or can only protect a radius? Castles can only protect a radius of half mile. Actually, castles can protect a radius far larger than that, because the thing is, castles tend to contain troops and be rallying points for forces. So if you don't take them, if you move beyond them, then they're in your rear and they can cause trouble. So you have to siege them. And the thing is, every time you're using forces to siege a castle, you then have less forces to move on. And less forces to move on. And you've got to supply more positions, and you're getting more exposed. So you then decide, well, I better keep my forces together in case the main army turns up, so I better siege the castle with my main army. And that then takes your time. And the thing is, if you don't siege them, because of the way logistics runs in those periods, that can be quite problematic for you. Because they can cause trouble. Even if they don't decide to attack your force directly, they are a castle which has troops, often with horses and personnel who are skilled at it, who will attack your logistics train. And you might think, well, the logistics train, in medieval armies, that's what they take that with them. They don't have a logistics train coming from home. Well, yes and no. They often do have quite a logistics train, quite a lot of carts, quite a lot of food, quite a lot of hangers-on, quite a lot of personnel. They things which are supporting that army moving forward, because it's several thousand people on the march. They're not just scavenging for food. I know that's the idea. Oh yes, they live off the land, they just scavenge it, but the actual supply chain and the logistics of medieval armies is slightly more complicated than that, and slightly more complex. And so this is why castles need to be dealt with. And also, there's the fact that, this might sound strange, but quite a lot of smaller towns are castles, and vice versa. So you often find the castle, you might even find, if you get an example, Newcastle. Quite a big city in the UK. It's built there because there's a new castle, and it builds up sort of around it. And there's been settlements there since Roman times and all these things because of the site and its affordable viability. But again, you find the same with York, you find the same, that often the castles are part of the cities and vice versa. So yeah, the forts are fun. And castles are fun. And then, well, later on you have the Palmerston's Follies. Now, these are called follies for two main reasons. One, they're called a folly because, how do I put this politely? They are by the time they're finished, the threat they're built against the French is obsessed with the Junicole. They have become the Junicole, and we all know what happens there. Basically, if Fleet was in the chat but now he'd be crying, because that's what basically happens. The other thing that happens is people are quite shocked because the first parts of the Palmerston Follies to be built are the forts which actually are inlandward facing on Portsmouth. And you go, why are they building that? They're defending against the French, they're coming across the sea. It's because the forts around Portsmouth got strong enough that the likelihood of a direct sea assault is very low. So if you're going to try and take out Portsmouth and its value is worthwhile taking out because of its importance, and with the fear that comes about from people, steamships, and the ability of steam to sail whenever they want, not worrying about the tide and the wind, suddenly you get the problem of, well, what happens if they turn up, offload a load of troops, and they come from the landward side and raid Portsmouth? Portsmouth could be overwhelmed. We could lose Portsmouth Navy Base. And Britain's had enough experience of Medway, etc., that is a level of paranoia. The British do have that level of paranoia. And so Portsmouth gets some landward defences. But also, they also build places like this. This is the Paul. Fort Paul. Paull. Which is on the Humber. And is a really cool fort to go wandering around. I will say this before anyone corrects me. Many years ago, I'm talking a decade and a half ago, I wandered round it, and was never quite sure whether I was inbounds and allowed to be there or not supposed to be there, because it really did feel like I was trespassing on someone's farm. But no one told me off, so I wandered around it and had a lovely time and thought it very interesting. But I will codify with that. I am still to this day not sure whether I was supposed to be there or not. And the thing is, fortifications, what you find is the scale of them increases. So, as gun ranges increase, the size of your fortification is going to disperse more. So you're going to be fortifying a larger. Your guns also have more range, and also the other advantage for fortifications usually is they can have bigger guns because you don't have to move them. So that's their first advantage. They can have the really big guns. They can have really strong defenses, but also you spread stuff out. Fortifications have grown and spread around in size, so usually what you find, instead of having a fort like this, you'll have a fort which is maybe some gun positions up the top of a hill on a rocky outcrop, and then pillboxes around it. And all the bunkerage and all the stuff is underneath, buried inside the hill, inside the rock. And that's your modern fortification. They're all fun. And then when we get an example of that, of it growing larger, is that by the time you get to World War II, I would argue that chain home is part of the coastal fortifications, because air defense is a part of your coastal defense, a part of your defense of your nation. And you need chain home to be able to do air defense. And this is the point of it starting to disperse, because the ranges of the weapon system you're dealing with, so you no longer have the large tower and in the castle or the fort, and the stables and the artillery there. You now have the artillery there. You have the tower, i.e. the radar, here. You have the stables, i.e. the airfield, over here with the aircraft ready to launch. You spread it about more. So it's far more difficult to disable for you to damage. No, we're not going to get into the SAM sightings in castles in the 20th century. Mainly that hasn't come up because, if we are honest, the British government doesn't spend much on surface-to-air missiles. On the grounds that it doesn't need to, because the Royal Air Force will provide the air defence of the UK. So we don't have anything like... We only have air defence missiles on our ships, and Sky Sabre. Land Saber and Sea Saber, the Scepter system. We do need more. We do need, that was almost part of my SDSR 2025, was we need some air defense missiles for the ships and for land. But it's almost got to be a case of, I think now perhaps they need to look into Asta for land. And I have already seen some discussions of it. But that would be an interesting thing to see to set up. But that's not today's topic. Today's topic is, why do the coastal defences not work in World War II? Why do they apparently not work? And well, I'm going to do this by talking about Norway. I'm going to do this by UK plans in World War II. I'm going to then have a shameless book plug. And then we're going to talk about the Atlantic Wall. We're going to talk about Dieppe, where it succeeded. The Commando raids, where they were sometimes successful, sometimes weren't. And D-Day, where of course it succeeded. And then I'm going to talk about the island hopping campaign and various methodologies the Japanese went through. And what you're going to realise is there is a common theme here. When it works, usually you have one of two situations. The defender was asleep at the wheel, or the attacker has brought overwhelming force, which they can do. But to bring that to build up that overwhelming force costs and takes a lot of time, and that is what is buying the nation in being subject to it a lot of strategic time versus the cost of investment. So the investment in fortifications is relatively cheap compared to the amount of stuff you have to spend to overwhelm them. Now, I would say that comes with a codicil. That comes with a codicil. There have been examples where nations have tried to construct or have constructed artificial islands, artificial land areas to fortify. And the only nation which have really had much success with that has been the Dutch. Because they literally do build land. They literally do build land. I am not so sure about them in some of the other nations doing it in the modern world. But that is something we will have to find out at some point, probably. At some point, it will probably become a problem that we will have to find out. Until then, we don't have to worry about it. Yeah, Peter Dawson, it's the emphasis is on some bloodhounds in the 60s and 70s. Some bloodhounds. Not many. And there was no successor in the 80s, or the 90s, or the 2000s, or the 2010s. We're now in the 2020s. It's now been 50, 60 years since we had any area air defense systems. No, you see, the trouble is, Crete's not on here because Crete's not really fortified. There are some things which go on in Crete, but it's not really fortified to the extent that we've been talking about coastal fortifications. Night, it doesn't matter when it's designed. As I was talking about in the things, and as I mentioned earlier, this one, Pendennis, was upgraded even in World War II. Every time there was a scenario where these fortifications, Pendennis and St. Maur's, were going to lose in their risk versus reward argument, they upgraded them. They upgraded their fortifications, they upgraded their cannon, they upgraded artillery from cannon to, horse-drawn artillery, mobile artillery. They upgraded their troops, their garrisons. Every time the risk versus reward started to peter, they upgraded them. So just because these forts were built by Henry VIII, doesn't mean that in World War II they were out of date. Doesn't mean they were out of date. It means that they were modernized to fit the need. And honestly, I would say be careful about saying that coastal artillery has fallen, coastal fortifications have fallen out of favor due to the rapid advance of technology, Knight, also. Because if you go to Finland, if you go to Sweden, Scandinavia as a whole, you'll find there are a lot of very interesting approaches to fortification and coastal defenses. And what you might... the difference is that the fortifications of old that you saw were castles and forts. The modern fortifications can be hard-standing and secure positions for surface anti-ship missiles and all these things to launch from. So it's not so much they've fallen out of favor, it's that technology has changed their form. Yeah, technology. One of the things that people often think is they think technology acts like a board rubber and gives you a clean slate. It doesn't. More often than not, it complicates a situation rather than simplifying it. It adds a layer to it. It changes your methodology, but maybe doesn't change your action. So, how I fortified a coast today versus how I fortified a coast in the past. Today, I might set up a whole load of remote weapon stations. A load of remote weapon stations to monitor areas, because if I'm going to have a camera watching somewhere, I might as well attach a machine gun or a cannon to it. I might as well. And let's be honest, if it's a small raiding party coming in and they don't realize the cannon is there, that cannon could rip them up and take them all out. Quite quickly, could shoot them up. I might have a fortified position somewhere hidden where there's some infantry waiting in a couple of APCs. But instead of it being a position they're going to fight from, think of it more as a sort of garage space they can hide out in. I might have some pieces or some concrete laybys on the road, which look like they're normal laybys which you would pull into if you had difficulty with a car or fancied a brake, needed a wee, whatever. And they actually might be heavily concreted and secured so that if a missile launcher wants to come along and launch a missile from it, it can turn up, deploy itself, park up, launch its missile. That's a program position that I know where that position is. So that means I know where the launch point is, and as long as I have a target point, that makes the targeting a lot easier. There are all sorts of ways I can fortify a modern country if I'm prepared to put in the money. Morgan Mackenzie, what did the coastal defense of Cyprus look like? There were some interesting installations done in Cyprus. There were some things done there. Yeah, basically the Bloodhounds were there to protect the V-bombers. Anyway, to World War II. To World War II. The invasion of Norway. Now, one of the things you have to remember about the invasion of Norway is that the Norwegian government was asleep at the wheel, and there has been a general effort post World War II to make it look like there was nothing the government could have done, to excuse the government completely. They spent a lot of effort and a lot of energy selling that narrative, that the government wasn't at fault. There was nothing they could have done. The German invasion success was inevitable. The trouble is, once you start looking at the things of the Oscaborg Fortress, and you think, well, hang on, if the moment they got the notice that Denmark was being invaded, they had sent out a radio notice to all the people to report, all the reservists to report to their places, and give them orders to defend against any people who try and come through. How well could Oscaborg have done if it was fully crewed? Oscaborg, of course, managed to sink the Blucher and hold up the advance long enough of the Germans that the Norwegian monarchy and their government managed to get away. It's not just the monarchy that managed to get away, the government managed to get away from Oslo. But think about this. Imagine if not just Oscaborg, but all the other parts of the Norwegian defences in that fjord had had all their personnel. That suddenly becomes a very different fight. It suddenly becomes a very different scenario. You're suddenly looking at a scenario where they're going, well, hang on. If they have all those extra personnel, then their guns are not only firing, but they're going to have mortar and machine gun teams. They might have riflemen also adding to the fire and engaging targets. And any troops trying to get ashore are going to be met by machine gunners and riflemen firing from various positions. And if there is anyone who demurs on the idea of firing against the Germans, well, there's going to be enough people there, enough orders out, that they are not going to get to demur for long, or they won't find themselves in position. And that's a problem for them. That is a problem for them. You see, Norway is a classic example of shoulda, woulda, coulda. Because it could have been the first massive defeat of the Germans. And whilst I don't think the Germans losing Norway would have saved France, it could have done something interesting for their confidence if they'd found themselves failing to get into there. Failing to take Norway. The forces lost wouldn't have affected France that much. The, personnel committed wouldn't have affected France that much. But the effect on their wider confidence, that could have been impressive. That could have been impressive and problematic for them. It could have been. And 40-plus-year-old torpedoes prove that that outdated. Yeah, they don't. But that's the thing. When you engage and talking about the engagement ranges that you're dealing with in the Norwegian fjords, it doesn't matter if your equipment's old. They're having to come into range of you. Hi, Lions. Oh, thank God. Lutzow also lost one of her turrets in that fight. So that force losing just Blucher would have been the best outcome ship-wise. Yeah. You know, nicest way, they could have lost the whole... If you'd had a fully crewed, all the reserves activated and put in position, the Germans could have lost the whole force invading Oslo. Just think about it. If they lose all the personnel and ships aimed for Oslo, and they lose all the ones aimed for Narvik, and those are just two I'm certain they'd lose, just think about how much damage they suffer. So yeah, honestly, the Germans could have lost a lot of ships and a lot of personnel. And that changes World War II dramatically, by the way. You suddenly get a World War II where Norway's considered the nation which beat Nazi Germany. I've run it as a simulation a few times, and the sheer naval losses that Norway that inflicts on Germany and the personnel losses, and then the aggregate capabilities that you get from having airfields in Norway that can sustain bombers attacking Germany, just eliminates so much of the German capabilities. And then you have the fact that Arctic convoys no longer come under a threat. The fact that German submarines going out into the North Atlantic through the North Sea have to basically transit the whole of the North Sea underwater because of aircraft with radar search, everything. It's a nightmare. If the Germans don't get Norway, they're in real trouble. And that's before we even get onto the whole Swedish iron ore thing and all the other stuff you can do. It's a cumulative thing which just cuts down their ability to win the war dramatically. Oxford couldn't reload their turret. They could, but only very slowly, I think, KVG. There's trouble with getting enough people there to do everything they need to do. But anyway, Oscarborg is an example of what happens when, how do I put this, the people crewing the fortifications go, well, we might not have all the people here, but we're asked for forgiveness rather than permission. We see an enemy warship coming in here. Well, it's not an enemy warship, but it's a German warship, and it's not been invited, and it coming in here with considering what happened to Denmark this morning, I'm not in a mood to ask permission. I'm going to ask for forgiveness. And also, by the way, that also changes Finland's calculation and all sorts of other things as well. If it has a major impact on World War II in so many ways if Norway doesn't fall. But it fell. And not because the coastal defences were inadequate. They could have done the job. They certainly could have made it so that anything that did make it to shore was going to be severely in severe trouble. And also, the thing is, if the coastal defences are working and are damaging German forces, like Oscarborg is, then suddenly the Germans are taking more losses, which is going to impede their entry into the thing. Norwegian troops are ready for them when they land, if they do manage to land, and on top of that, there's going to be enough noise that the British are probably going to be coming in behind the Germans as hard and fast as they possibly can, which means the Germans get caught into a very nasty sandwich. Angry Vikings on one side, Royal Navy on the other side. You do not want to be the filling in that sandwich. And then we got defending Britain in 1940, because, by the way, Britain is one of the most beautiful countries to wander around if you want to see fortifications and how you do defence in depth and coastal defence in the modern age, because you can find these everywhere. I mean, they are literally everywhere. Also, concrete blocks still turning up. You can find them on random beaches if you wander around. It's brilliant fun. But these two things turn up everywhere. You know, they were put all sorts of places. I have, and I cannot find it now, but I did have it earlier, an entire book of pillboxes and where they are around the UK. And I kid you not, it's a book which isn't thinner. It's a more traditionally shaped book, not a long one. It's more like that. But it's about the same thickness as this. Okay? It's a big book. This is Amphibious Assault Maneuver from the Sea. This was compiled by Tristan Lovett. Tristan Lovering, I mean. And it's an excellent resource if you can get hold of it. Amphibious Assault from the Sea, Maneuver from the Sea. It tells you about all the operations which went well and were planned. And that's the thing about amphibious operations. You will only ever hear about the ones which succeeded. You don't hear about the ones which didn't take place because they looked at the cost of doing it and decided it wasn't worth it. You don't hear about the ones which were planned which weren't actually carried out because it wasn't enough need for it. You don't hear about those things. You only hear about the operations which took place, and usually don't succeed because they decided that the force deploying the overwhelming force is worth it. Now, of course, I would love to say the UK just did the whole traditional methodologies of defense, but there's also... We have a lot of fuel, don't we? What do you mean? We have a lot of oil, don't we? And just a lot of serving regular naval and army officers backing away going, yes, yes, as a home guard officer cackles, we have so much fuel! Like that. Fuel! And of course, the idea was to burn everything. Never believe Dad's Army is an accurate portrayal of the British Home Guard. The British Home Guard were mostly World War I veterans who were absolutely certain of two things. One, they hated the Germans because of what had happened in World War I and they didn't want to fight them again in World War II. And two, that their job was to buy time for often their wives, their daughters, and their grandchildren, and maybe other children who've been evacuated from cities who are staying with them, to get to safety. Think about this. You have World War I veterans who know their territories and are absolutely convinced their job is to buy as much time as possible for their wives, their daughters, and their grandchildren to get to safety. That is not a group I want to deal with. Well, this group is also highly inventive. There are a number of them who came up with some very interesting booby traps, which were still being got rid of by them in the 1960s. When I say interesting booby traps, I mean some of them make chicken-warmed nuclear landmines look like a sane idea. There was one home guard which were even brewing their own explosive compound to make their own mines. To this day, we are not quite sure what was in the frigating compound. All we know is that the British Army, when they saw it, thought that seems like a very interesting starting point and led to a lot of interesting developments post-World War II when they got some scientists onto it. And, by the way, that up there is one of the interesting defenses. You find these on bridges, and you can still find relics on them, certain bridges, and they're literally where they can stick in metal stops, which rather like the concrete things, will stop you being able to move a tank across. They're basically designed to hold tanks up. Some random. Most UK pillboxes are covered in graffiti and stink of piss. Not quite, actually. It's going to sound strange. There are certainly some which do, but the vast majority are so hidden and buried in the countryside that most people do not know where they are. And if they do stink of piss, it's usually fox, not human. Home Guard was just evil settling, of course. No, I'd like to say Home Guard were chaotic neutral, given purpose. Uh, they weren't evil, they weren't looking to do it to someone, but if you came at them, they were quite prepared to do it to you. So that's the chaotic neutral. And then, of course, there was also the SOE and the SOE specialists who'd stay behind, who cause trouble, and yeah, they're just fun. Yeah, you know, in the nicest way, Runon, that's nothing compared to some of the things that come up, Brun. Oh, good lord. Look, all I will say is, Britain has a national history of getting incredibly inventive when it comes to ways of killing people. I mean, others are very effective at it, and each nation has their own skill set and approach to it, and it's their philosophy of it. The British are very good at taking what is normal, mundane things and turning them into absolutely lethal implements of warfare. Not quite sure where that comes from in the national psyche. Just there. Just be warned, okay? So, defending Britain was, how do I put this politely? It was well planned out. And that's one of the reasons why Sea Lion doesn't go ahead. Because, think about it, first criteria was getting control of the air, which means you need to defeat Chain home, and you need to defeat the RAF. Second criteria is then, you have to maintain sea control. Good luck. Look at how the example I usually say again this when people say, "Well, they could have done." I go, look at the casualties the Royal Navy was prepared to take to evacuate the army from Dunkirk, to evacuate the army from Greece, to evacuate the army from Crete, to evacuate the army from Norway. Look at the casualties they're prepared to take to do that. Now imagine the casualties the Royal Navy is prepared to sustain to stop an invasion of Britain. Just imagine it. Imagine what the Royal Navy is prepared to throw into that fight. And then, of course, you've got all these lines of defences, and the whole point was you get so bogged down trying to push through them, the British will be able to pull together their mobile forces and overwhelm and push you back into the sea. Because that's what you try and do. That's what you try and do. That's what your purpose is. You know, how do you defeat an amphibious assault? You cut it off from the sea, and you push it back to the sea. It's just, yeah. The losses that the Germans would likely to have inflicted on them in Sea Lion is astronomical. But the thing is, again, you've got, on this scenario, you have got defences which are crude and certainly going to be firing. You have artillery positions which are crude and going to be firing. You have the Home Guard. You have regular army units on patrol in certain key areas. You have more forces ready to come along. And you have all these prepared defensive positions. All of these prepared defensive positions. That's the problem. You're going to be dealing with prepared defensive position after prepared defensive position after prepared defensive position, and it's just going to be overwhelming for you. It really is. And that's not saying anything bad about the people involved. I'm sure they'd have tried their best, but the thing is, amphibious operations are not always are by their very nature very risky propositions. There is a reason why the British prefer to use the amphibious tactic of don't land where the enemy is. That's been our great tactic throughout history. One of the reasons why the Germans build the Atlantic Wall, as long as it is, and that is where we're going next after the shameless book plug, is because the British have a habit of landing where the enemy isn't, so you have to fortify everything, is the theory. It becomes very expensive and very difficult, and it's one of the reasons why some of the fortifications of the Atlantic Wall are literally just wooden stakes straight out of Agincourt, but we'll get into that in a bit. Yeah, we're not going to get in quite how creative the Cypriots could be. So, shameless book plug time. Now, this is the point at which I say thank you again for all supporting, all the support you give me to the channel. Thank you for everything you all do. I'm gonna apologize over the next couple of days because with the computer breaking, I hadn't uploaded a couple of the videos, so I'm gonna try and re-record them on the laptop, but I'm gonna be re-recording them mostly tomorrow and trying to upload tomorrow, so we'll see what happens. We'll see how that goes. But I have got 2 videos ready to go. The new, the new, what do you call it? USB stick should arrive on Saturday the 19th. And hopefully I will then do an image, and I'll probably take an image from the backup image I've got stored on this machine, which I've got access through this machine, load it onto that, and set it up and use it to do the PC. Hopefully it works. If it doesn't work, then... well, then I'm in trouble, and I'll need to figure something out, because that means that's basically no chance then. It... the lack of beeping, but also I got my trusty electrical voltmeter out and checked for circuit movement and checked the circuits and things, amp meter. It's the full electrical tester out and various other things to test the circuits, and my strong suspicion is there are problems in the motherboard with its connections, and basically I think shock damage has triggered something. I'm not sure what. The damage from the book falling, and I couldn't have done this. If I had tried, I couldn't have done this, okay? The book has managed to fall corner first onto where the power supply button and the restart button meet. On the top of the fractal case I have, which is a very nice case, but, you know. And, managed to damage both those buttons. Actually cracked them both. Which I didn't realise until I got them off, because you can't see it from above, but once you open it up and you get them out and you pull it all apart, you can see it from underneath and go, oh, frigate, they got cracked. And caused other damage internally onto that switches, but it seemed okay. It seemed okay, but it's the only point I can think of where it came from. And then it seems to have caused shock damage into the system. The hard drives look like they're testing as fine. I'm gonna get something to test those out with and hook those in and check them up. But I can do that. I can hook them up to the laptop and check they're working before I put them into a new machine. But the thing is, it looks like it's if I can't use the boot USB to get it to work, then I am. Yeah, it's going to be a while before I can probably get it, because, as I've said earlier, I've got car bills this month, service and MOT, and I've got my tax bill this month. So I haven't got any free cash, and certainly not a grand sitting around. So yeah, that it could be, you could be having laptop presentations for a while. I'm not even sure if this is going to run Powder Monkey as well. I think honestly that could overload this poor little laptop. I'm going to need to do some work on the poor laptop as it is to make it slightly better, but yeah, it's fun. But, yeah. Anyway. Thank you for your support. Thank you for making it possible. I have got some books to talk to you all about as well, which I was going to talk about while I was doing here, because they kind of fit with what this whole topic is going to be. Meet Spectre Invasion. This is Steve Dunn's new book, The Royal Navy and the Defence of Britain's Coast, 1900 to 1918. I know it's not one of my books, but I've plugged my book. I might as well plug someone else's book as well. And it's a really, really cool book. I've had it for a couple of weeks, and it's been really fun to read. It's been really interesting in my travels, wandering around reading it. And, yeah, I found it, there's some quite good things here, like the Feed the Guns papers, etc. And it's basically about all the stuff the Royal Navy got involved in, and how they were doing the various operations they were, and how they were looking at defence of the UK. It's interesting to think about it from their position. At various points, the British do consider sticking 9.2-inch guns around the UK in large numbers, and they don't get it. But it is a very good book. Oh no, Lions, your PC plan, the PC plan, as we've discussed before, is going for fleet. I will get sorted out. Don't worry, I will get sorted out. My coach, yeah, but I need to buy something to do that, because my the thing I used to use to get to individually connect hard drives up to things has got broken in the move. I only found this out when I went to dig it out and looked at it and went, frig it, I'm going to have to buy another one. Don't worry, it only costs 15 quid, so it's not exactly something that's going to break my bank, but it's just annoying. It got broken in the move. But there's this also, which came with Rodney and Nelson, the Shipcraft book, and revised new edition. It's cool. It is cool, and it includes details on the Tamiana 1-700 Rodney, which is a really beautiful design. A really beautiful design. There's a few 1-700s pictured here. 1-600 was nice. The 1-200 by Trumpeter seems to be particularly beautiful. I'm not sure how big 1-200 scale makes this, but if I was going to do a model of HMS Rodney or Nelson and build it, I would probably be 1-200. Because I'd want it as big as possible, so I can make it as detailed as possible and as pretty as possible. But that's for definitely once I get the house sorted out, because I think that's big enough that it would be mounted on top of that would take over an entire bookshelf's top. It's a very good book. Now, the thing is, though, is Shipcraft 23 came to me with that Invasion book, but also came with me with Shipcraft 15. Queen Elizabeth class battleships. And, well, the thing I like about this and you're all going to love this. You are going to absolutely adore this. One of the things they included is the colour scheme for the fairy swordfish that flew from them. Oh, yeah. And it's, again, got some beautiful models. It's got some beautiful plans in there that can give you detailed plans, which I'm going to be using, of course, in my work. This is why I like these books. I get the plans and the Model 2 modifications and all the details of them. But, yeah, there are the paint schemes. There's a scratch-built 1-384 scale. There's a 1-128 scale. All the scratch-built, these lovely scratch-built models. But then they go and show you the various models. The White Ensign 1-700. The Airfix 1-600. You can get, and how their lovely they look. And they are pretty darn cool. And there's even Academy's 1-350 scale. Yep, That's a 1 to 350 scale. Not quite 1 to 200, but still pretty nice. Pretty nice. They are some beautiful designs, and they do have beautiful details on them. And the various model products you can buy to get them up. And of course, these books all have a bit of history in them, a bit of detailing, some pictures of their service life, what they get up to. They're gorgeous works, they really are. Oh no. So there you go. Those arrived. And I thought I'd use the shameless book plug to show them off. Go. If Fleet's Hosh-inspired PC can run Streambot, you should be able to. We'll hope. We'll hope. I'm just worried about how much noise the fans making already on this thing. Anyway, to the next question. Or rather, to the next point. Atlantic Wall. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this was quite so long because of the issues with the British having a habit of landing where they feel like it. It's because they have a habit of landing where you aren't. The British have a long history of amphibious operations of going, oh good, you fortified that place, that's good, we'll land over there. I'm glad you can barely hear them. There's a reason I'm using the mic I'm using, so hopefully it keeps it at a minimum, the fan noise to a minimum. Now, with that being said, there is a wide variety and differential over this particular, over this wall as to its quality. There is a wide variety as over its quality. Some points, as mentioned earlier, it is literally wooden stakes stuck in a southern sea. And some points you have, most of the time you do have some decent machine gun bunkers and some artillery positions put in along the place. But the guns they're equipped with can be old French guns, all sorts of things the Germans have found in different places. They're very rarely the latest and greatest of German weaponry or artillery. That's very rarely available. That's mostly going to the Eastern Front. So don't expect this to be the best of the positions they can put together. Now, saying that, there are positions which do, of course, get that level of attention. Those positions are often things which are key ports and the Pas-de-Calais area, i.e. the bit which is closest to Britain. The bit which is closest to Britain is often the bit which gets the most attention. Now, the thing is, that's useful in some ways, because it means you have got strong defenses where you're most likely to be where you most don't want the enemy to take. But the thing is, an enemy who's willing to think laterally can get round it. Now, one of the key things the Allies do, of course, is the Mulberry Harbours. And all sorts of efforts to take their own forces forward. To make sure they're in a position where they don't have to take one of the heavily fortified positions. I.e., they use the British trick of going elsewhere. They're not doing a coup de main. They're doing a coup de confounder, as I like to call it. They're going where you're not. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't try that. That doesn't mean there weren't some people who had some really bright ideas. And I would say the first thing I'm going to talk about is one of the brightest of ideas. One of the brightest ideas. And that's the Dieppe raid. Because Mountbatten had to give it a shot, you know. He managed to usurp Roger Keyes, who'd annoyed Churchill by basically saying, "That's wrong, sir. That's wrong. You're being an idiot." Churchill had wanted someone in combined operations who would get his vision. Unfortunately, Keyes' vision was for very well trained, very well organised formations to do lightning raids that would be full of dash and daring, but would most importantly would be sensible and well planned out. What Churchill wanted was action now, action today, action this minute. And Mountbatten was great for that, because Mountbatten was a politician in uniform in so many ways. He was just as much about action now. Action for the sake of doing action. Dieppe wasn't so much a disaster as the most stupid thing ever done. The reason I say it wasn't a disaster is because, sadly enough, on the scale of losses, whilst it was a tremendous loss of life and a loss of personnel, it wasn't really a massive loss in terms of the capabilities of the overall wider forces. It wasn't of the level of, oh great, we now can't do this or this or this because we lost the personnel at Dieppe. Which is annoying, because maybe if it had been a disaster, some of the people involved in making those decisions and listening to those bright ideas might have got the kicking they deserved. But as they didn't, there is always the argument about it being about gaining experience for Normandy. The one problem is that the person leading the planning for Normandy is a guy called Admiral Ramsay. And he basically starts planning those operations and working on those plans from the moment he's finished conducting Dunkirk. And in many ways, Dieppe, if it had been successful, was the springboard Mountbatten was looking for to try and take over first Ramsay's position, and then take over, probably try and go for what would later be Eisenhower's post. Or at least be deputy to Eisenhower in a naval sense, and basically telling Eisenhower, trying to manage Eisenhower from below. It's one of the things of, people often tell me Dieppe is where you learn what not to do. The thing is, most of the British plans, which were going on beyond that and before that, had already decided that was not what you did. Dieppe had actually been dropped as an operation several times before, but in 1942, there's been something there, and there's been nothing much since. And there's no big raid, no glorious victory. And so they decide to plan it, and they decide to plan it within a month. Now, the first problem you have is that people start going, well, there's no naval fire support, so how are they able to get in? Because they're not bringing any battleships with them. And usually, the reason for there being no battleships is blamed on Pound being worried over having lost Repulse and Prince of Wales previously, in about 2 aircraft. Now, when you look at the actual naval discussions and you start going through it, you find out they're more worried about clearing out the mines. Clearing out mines. The RAF are volunteered to provide air cover, and whilst they don't have much faith in it, they are bringing fighter control ships, they are planning on bringing destroyers. There is a lot of force there. But the fact is, they don't even send cruisers. So they don't even, not only send battleships, they don't even send cruisers to provide fire support for a major amphibious operation. The reason is because you need minesweepers. You need a lot of minesweepers, and they weren't available in the numbers required, and they were off doing other things at this point, and you weren't able to retask them in time. So you couldn't create enough space for battleships to do the necessary manoeuvring to provide fire support. That's the problem. You need enough space for the battleship to go in and provide fire support. It's a rather similar argument as to when people go, why weren't there carriers at D-Day? It's because they weren't, because they're not useful. Carriers don't work. And you go, no, it's because, do you realise how much space a carrier needs to manoeuvre around? It's quite obvious why there aren't any aircraft carriers at D-Day. They'd have got in way of A, the amphibious transports, and B, they'd have required so much more minesweeping effort that frankly there wouldn't be a minesweeper left in the rest of the UK. For what? When you consider all the aircraft you can launch from relatively close by land bases. What's the value of having an aircraft carrier there versus having the aircraft carriers off doing other things which you need them to be doing? There's more going on in the world than just D-Day at that time. It's very important, yes, but there are other operations going on. It's the same with battleships. You know, we talk about Warspite Texas on D-Day and what they get up to and how many rounds of ammunition they go through, and it's all wonderful, but what we forget is that they are steaming around the whole time in channels which have been specifically cleared of mines that are being kept cleared and being swept constantly by minesweepers. A lot of them. And with a month, it was going to be a glorious operation. The trouble is, the person who had the glorious idea, it had to be delivered in a month, and it couldn't be. They still massed nearly 250, 230, nearly 230, 40 actually, close to 240 ships and landing craft, including 8 destroyers, but it was 8 Hunt-class destroyers. A single flotilla of destroyers was used as gunfire support. That was it. That was what was available. 8 destroyers. The RAF was supporting with 74 squadrons. They're roughly they're very nearly 11,000 troops deployed. By the British, the Canadians provided the most thanks to the 2nd Infantry Division. But they're also the 3rd, 4th, 10th, 30th and 40th Commando, or rather 40 Commando. And there are 50 US Army Rangers and some French specialists. You know, they're all around. It's a huge operation involving Polish, Canadian, British, Free French, US and Czechoslovakian personnel. It's a real allied operation. For the Germans, the EP turns into a vast learning experience, and they do make a lot of effort to strengthen their defences and the rest of their coastlines around Europe, you know, after what's worked there. And the thing is, if you take a look at the EP, and you look at it, you sit there and go, that's not a place I really want to attack. It's a wide, flat area, but it's also a major port, so it's going to be quite heavily garrisoned. There's a lot of positions where I can mount fortifications like you see there, the machine gunners. And that's a nasty big beach where beyond it is another killing zone. So I've got a rather large open area with no cover to get over before I get to the opponent. Oh, and it's quite steep. It's not really a good beach. Dieppe might be in Normandy. But it's in the marine, the marine section of Normandy, and it's not a fun place to try and land. And also, there's none of the to get over the various defences. There's none of the things that we take for granted later on. They're just landing a load of Churchill tanks and newly created landing craft tank LCTs. The LCMs are doing a lot of the work. And, you know, there's a lot of effort going on from the various forces involved, but realistically, Dieppe is one of those operations where the idea was they would do a reconnaissance in force. And you look at it and go, there's a lot of force for much reconnaissance. There is honestly a good argument to be made that the EP was more of a, let's do a reconnaissance in force, and if we get ashore and we can hold this territory, then we'll try to rapidly reinforce there because we've taken a port, so we could theoretically do this, and turn this into the second front, and turn this into the invasion of Europe. Which I honestly don't believe anyone seriously was thinking, because if they were... Oh, good lord. The fact is, though, they've done so little information gathering. When you compare it to what Ramsey's staff organise for D-Day, for Normandy, it's obscene. This is an invasion strength formation in many regards. It's a 10,000, this is 11,000 troops nearly, being deployed as if they are a commando raid. Commando raids are supposed to go in by stealth, by speed, be light, be fast, be maneuverable. This has also got main battle tanks. They have got a large formation. They are hundreds of ships, hundreds of craft strong. This is not going to be stealthy. This is not going to be quiet. And so, unsurprisingly, it goes badly. Now, is anyone surprised such an operation would go badly? What's the main killer? Sleeping unexpected Shingle Beach. Yeah, that was a big problem. Yeah, because it meant the tanks had difficulty getting up there, but also the landing craft had difficulty getting up there. It was just all around. Dieppe is badly prepared. Thank you, Sly Glitch. You know, it's a good scenario. It's one of those things of it looks so great on paper. The idea, the moment you actually look at it, though, and actually look at it seriously, and take it from the initial piece of paper to actually from the 5-page dossier to the 200-page dossier, where you've actually done deep and serious study, you're going, this is stupid. This is really stupid. And it is. It is truly stupid. But the thing is, it's building on the commando rates. It's building on the experience they gained, and it's trying to scale them up to a full-sized operation, and it's just not going to work. We start considering the commando raids, though, they're often very different than this thing. This was 10,500 men. When you start going through the commando raids, Operation Collar had 200. Operation Ambassador, 140. Operation Claymore, 800. Operation Gauntlet, 1,500. By the way, Claymore, Gauntlet, they both take place in Norway. And yeah, it's again the 2nd Canadian Infantry Brigade, by the way, so they're an experienced formation. There's a reason they're assigned to it. And the Canadians are experienced in these kinds of operations. And then you sort of start going for the other operations, and it's, you know, next one which he has 800 men is Operation Archery. And then there's Operation Chariot, which is 600, which is, of course, Saint Nazaire. And you go through all these operations, and suddenly there's this one which is 10,500 troops, Operation Jubilee, reconnaissance in force. Seriously, the nearest one of it is Operation Gauntlet, which is a 7th of the size. A literal 7th of the size. Think about that. Operation Gauntlet is a 7th of the size of Operation Jubilee. And that's the next biggest one. You know, it sits out so strangely. And you look through the other, these are the raids which are targeted. The British launch roughly 58 raids during the course of World War II on the Atlantic Wall. And some of them are successful, some of them are not. Some, the objective is still not known. as the Operation Batman's the example of that one. But there again, it's called Batman, so of course we wouldn't know what the operation was about because Batman never talks, does he? But leaving that to one side, it was actually supposed to be tied on Cherbourg, France, and it was cancelled as the weather was terrible. And honestly, commando operations, which cause a lot of worry for the Germans, have a terrible success rate. They make politicians feel like you're doing something, but actually go through the 58 of them and start looking at whether they were successful or not, and suddenly you find a very interesting telling story. You know, Operation Collar. It was a propaganda victory. Reconnaissance and capture of prisoners. 200 personnel involved. That takes place in France. But then the very next operation, Operation Ambassador, which was in the Channel Islands, they land 40 out of the 140 they were planning to land. And it results in no military gains, no discernible military effect at all. Operation Claymore, the third command operation carried out. 800 men, destroy industry in the Falkland Islands. It's successful. So is Operation Chess is Operation Chess was supposed to be reconnaissance and capture of prisoners in Amphibious, France. The troops, the commandos, remained ashore for a whole hour. They found no prisoners to take, and there were no casualties sustained. Literally nothing happened. Operation Gauntlet, which was Spitsbergen, Norway, involving 1,500 men from the 2nd Canadian Infantry Brigade. They managed to destroy some coal mining facilities. Operation Acid Drop. 25 personnel involved. They were supposed to be going for Neufchâtel, Harmont, Melmont, France. Reconnaissance and capture of prisoners. They spent 30 minutes ashore but didn't encounter any Germans. Literally. 30 minutes ashore. You start going through these operations, and whilst they are very brave, the personnel involved in them are very brave, they're doing a very dangerous thing. The amount of operations which come back as unsuccessful, or we literally had no contact with the enemy and achieved nothing at all, is quite disturbingly high. And it's worthwhile to note that as the pace of operations goes up, in terms of the number they're trying to mount and how often they're trying to do them, especially when you have good old Mountbatten in charge, they actually start to get more and more problematic rather than Keyes. Because there's less and less prep time. Andy. So is that the only time the US ground forces were technically driven off a beachhead? It depends what you think about some of the War of 1812 in Canada, but probably. Technically, if you're being very technical about it with beachhead. But yeah, the commando raids were a great way of gathering information, and once you start looking at the later ones, they're mostly there about reconnaissance, they're mostly there about gathering information about the German defences. And that's one of the reasons why the commandos do lead the operations in D-Day, etc. It's because they already know they are the ones most familiar with German defences and can therefore have an advantage for penetrating them. That's the idea anyway. But realistically, once we get to D-Day itself, Operation Overlord, we're talking about a massive amount of planning. An absolutely massive amount of planning. And a massive amount of research and development. There's the whole Hobart's Funnies. And by the way, here's another little secret that I'm going to get very close so you can hear it just like this. When nations are serious about the threat of war, things like Hobart's funnies start to appear in their forces. So a good trick to note when war might likely be going to happen is to start studying your equivalent of your Royal Engineers or your Armoured Corps. If they start to get a whole range of funny-looking vehicles that are obviously designed to deal with things like minefields, obstacles, various engineering problems, and they actually start to get them in numbers, that means something's coming. Just having them, that's perfectly normal. We like to keep the skills alive. But if they start to proliferate, that means someone's getting worried about actual combat and actual conflict where people are going to sustain casualties. Because those funny-looking vehicles, not only are they exceptionally important, they're also the number one targets of the enemy whenever they see them. Because the first rule of every anti-tank gunner, every artilleryman, every missileer, everyone in the armed forces is if you see something which looks unusual and wacky, kill it first. Because obviously it's probably something special and rare, and you want it out the way. And that's been the way for a long, long time. And just look at this. In that picture alone, there's probably more ships than there were involved in Dieppe. More vessels involved in Dieppe than there were in Dieppe. Literally. Moving more forces. And it's worthwhile noting, Dieppe is actually closer to Calais. It's further this way than where the Allies land in Normandy. They're landing the other side of the river. And look at the area they clear out. Look at the huge areas they clear out to protect, to allow the battleships to operate, to allow the cruisers to provide fire support. Look at all the area which has to be cleared by the mine sweepers. Look at the area they have to do. It's colossal. Oh, you off? Oh, he's been given plenty of poodle treats, but yes, he does need proper food. He does need proper food. Sorry, Poodle has disappeared. And so, this is what we're dealing with. This is the reality of what breaking these defenses looks like. When you're looking at the construction of 2 mulberry harbours, which are huge portable concrete harbours. You're looking at deploying, and I'm just going to read this out. Operation Overlord. In terms of its strength, if I get up my notes, which are in my OneDrive, so give it time. On the PC, they're stored on the PC for Overlord. For the laptop, they are stored on OneDrive, so give it time. You're doing well, girl. You're doing well. You're a good little computer. Now, the forces are, of course, strong. That they're all employing, and the Germans are using to defend. But the thing is, the forces that the British are prepared and the French and Americans are prepared to bring to ensure this victory, they're deploying 1.5 million troops by July, over 2 million by the end of August there. It's just colossal. But I want my list of battleships. Where is my list of battleships? And cruisers. I have it. I want to make sure I get all the names correct. Mm-hmm. Come on, Alex. Find it. Yay! No, that's not what I was looking for. I was looking for ships. There's the... I want ships. I want ships. Where my ship section? There you go. Found them. Okay, battleships. We have Arkansas, Nevada, Ramillies, Rodney, Texas, and Warspite, and Nelson. So, yeah. Nelson was held in reserve till the June 10th, but she was there. If they needed her, they had an extra battleship to come along. Always nice to have her. Heavy cruisers, they have Augusta, Frobisher, Hawkins, Quincy, and Tuscaloosa. Light cruisers, they have Argonaut, Ajax, Arethusa, Belfast, Bellona, Black Prince, Cape Town, Ceres, Danae, Diadem, Dragon, used as a block ship in the Gooseberry Breakwater, but, you know, she was the Polish vessel. Emerald, Enterprise, George Legumes, Glasgow, Mauritius, Montcalm, Orion, Cilia, and Sirius. And there are roughly 140 other destroyers and escorts, 2 monitors, Erebus and Roberts, and 500 and odd other warships involved. Plus, of course, the 2 fighter direction ships, Boxer and Bruiser. And a huge amount of transports. In simple terms, the sheer amount of force deployed to provide support for D-Day is overwhelming. That's what its purpose is. Hmm? Oh, ex-Submariner. While negative, I don't think I saw any Germans raiding the UK. The Germans actually didn't have the forces to be able to raid the UK much. But the reason there's negativity about the reason I'm giving some negativity about it is because actually the Commandos were a very good operation, and in many, many ways. It's just, the thing is, they're a good operation when they're allowed to do it. Keyes was very much setting up a very good organization, which was pretty much a forerunner and similar ideas as what the SAS and the SBS would eventually be formed into. But the thing is, under Mountbatten, the organization became far more about results in terms of, instead of the results of the operations and carefully planning and carrying them out, it became more about, we've done this, we've done something, which was just using up people personally. And there were, let's put it this way, the German activity in the channel was quite fierce at many times, using Schnellboats. As I said, when they got involved in Operation Tiger and various other things, they caused issues. But yeah, the thing is, the commando raids, they are useful, and when done well, can be devastating and effective. When they're just being done to chuck people at targets, to say we're doing something, then they cost a lot. They cost a lot of brave people's lives for no real gain. Take care, Peter Dawson. So that's the thing. That's why I'm talking. That's why I sort of. I don't want you to get the impression I'm talking down to commando raids. What I'm talking down is the fact that they, well, not the commandos, but the commando raids over time. The reason their successes drop is because of they're not being given the time to properly prepare them. The ones they are, St. Nazaire is great. St. Nazaire is absolutely in the teeth of everything. Shouldn't have gone off as well as it did. It did go off quite well. Even though I don't agree with naming a ship Campbelltown today for amphibious warfare, because I don't think that sets the right tone for amphibious warfare forces. But leaving that to one side, that's what I'm going to name it. It's the Inspiration class. It's the Type 31s. The whole naming of culture of the Inspiration class has looked interesting to me. But the thing is, the organization which Keyes was setting up versus the organization which Mountbatten ends up implementing, how Mountbatten ends up implementing it is my problem. Because Mountbatten is in some ways is very good, but in other ways is rapidly promoted. He was a destroyer flotilla captain at the beginning of the war, level with Philip VIII, and was doing pretty darn well at. He was then sent to America to become captain of HMS Illustrious while she was in her refit over there, but he's pulled back from over there to do combined operations because Churchill likes him. And first he's made combined operations advisor after Churchill's got rid of Keyes, because Keyes kept going, we need to do preparation. We can't just do an attack for an attack's sake. We need to do actual proper preparation and planning. Mountbatten turns around to Churchill and goes, yeah, we can do that. We can do that. We can do that. And basically, him and Churchill feed off each other in a very bad and unhealthy way, because they're both vision men. And they have a great vision and a great idea, and they don't necessarily think through the implementation. Okay? I hope that explains my point. I hope that explains why, sort of, the point of analysis I was trying to make on the commandos, because I was worried from your comments that I hadn't quite landed that point, so I tried to put it. Rapidly promoted. Yeah, rapidly promoted. No, don't, Lions, don't confuse Mountbatten with being a yes man. Mountbatten is not a yes man. Mountbatten is a vision man, and the thing is, you have two vision men working together. And the trouble is, they tend to feed off each other's visions and go, but we could do this, but we could add this, and we could add this, and they're out competing each other for who has the greatest vision, and it ends up getting people killed in the most disturbing way, because at no point do they ever listen to someone going, excuse me. And that's the real reason. As said, the reason why narrowboat battleships or cruisers in supporting Dieppe is literally because the Royal Navy's going, we can't support them there. We don't have the minesweepers. We don't have the things in place to do that. That's going to take a while to set up. We can't do that in a month. And no, we've got to go. We've got to get it done. We've got to do something. We've got to do something. And you sit there and go, well, if you had some cruisers there, a couple of cruisers, let's say a couple of 6-inch cruisers even, supporting those destroyers and so providing support to the troops going up the beach, that would have been a heck of a firepower increase. You have a couple of towns lobbing, each with 12 6-inch guns, lobbing in as fast as they can. That's going to make Dieppe almost viable as an operation. Add in a county with 8-inch guns lobbing in, and yeah. EXO Mariner, actually, what was learnt was Mountbatten was removed entirely from the planning process for D-Day. And was never got involved in that. So, yeah, and it's saying it's better to have tried and failed is different from we didn't take proper time to prepare, so we basically jumped the gun and a lot of other people died, but I'm okay. That's the other problem I have in this scenario. So It's basically, yeah, you can say learn from failures, but honestly, with Dieppe, if they'd made it, okay, we want to launch Dieppe, and given 3 months or 4 months rather than a month time, a month to do it, sort of a thing, and put it together for Operation Jubilee, you could probably have had some some ships with larger guns there, and you could have changed Dieppe's outcome to a rapid to an extent, and possibly even made it less a loss, and all these things. And the trouble is, these are lessons which already were learned. That's the big problem. The main trouble you have with poor Mountbatten is not only is he quickly and rapidly promoted, he hasn't had a chance to go and do the studies the Royal Navy has for amphibious warfare, to learn the lessons of Gallipoli, to learn the lessons of other operations, which is what they try and teach their senior officers. He doesn't go to Greenwich. He doesn't get the advanced staff courses. And he needs more time with those, realistically. He needs to learn those so he won't make those mistakes. But that's the trouble. He hasn't done those courses, and Mountbatten is a man of not only lots of visions, but great sense of purpose. And so he doesn't listen often to others telling him this is not a good idea. Yeah, Mountbatten was posted to India. He was posted to command Allied forces in India and sort of Burma, that sort of area. He was just basically sent as far away from Europe as physically possible. Mainly as a result of Dieppe. Basically, after Dieppe, he found his position increasingly untenable, and he was removed. Because whilst Churchill might support him, no one else did, because, as said, it's not a case of he's learning things which they didn't know and gaining valuable information. It's stuff they already did know, and they already had worked out. And that's the problem. That's the main problem I find with Dieppe, is that both Churchill and Mountbatten phrase it as it allowed us to learn a lot of things, and then you go look at the actual planning and the work that was being done prior to this on what invasion of Europe would need, and etc., and all these things, and suddenly you find they'd already worked that out. They'd already started work on things like, well, the classic example I give is Hobart's Funnies. Now, these particular formations are the 79th Infantry Division. And they're always, picked up as being something which comes to out of the failure of Dieppe. But then you start looking at them, and you actually start looking at the work on the stuff which goes into them. And most of these vehicles are actually starting work on, well, at least the ideas and the conceptions are around well before 1942. It's the construction which has taken time. And you can argue that maybe Dieppe does accelerate the construction programs of them and accelerate the numbers of them. But when you consider things like the crab mine clearers, which, I'm showing, I've got a nice picture of here. When we start talking about that and start thinking, well, what does that know? Well, that starts off with what's called the Matilda Scorpion, which had first been used in Egypt in 1942, in the summer of 1942, well before the Dieppe raid. And so they've been developing these ideas already before then. We can go through other tanks. The armoured vehicle, armoured vehicle of the Royal Engineers, their assault vehicles. Again, they have a history before 1942, a long history before 1942. And various things have been developed for them. The thing is, though, they were given various different names before then. In October 1943, when they are designed as AVREs. And given that nomenclature. But, they'd had various vehicles for that role before that. And It's October 1942 that a prototype's ordered for it. It is October 1942. But if you think about it, that the Dieppe raid takes place in August 1942, and the designs had already been being worked on and being prepared long before October 1942, before August 1942, it becomes more of a case of, okay, is it so much we learnt lessons, or and we learnt we needed stuff, or we had it drummed into us, or that the people who hadn't been listening before that this stuff was needed suddenly had it drummed into them by Dieppe. Luxury of hindsight is one thing to claim, but actually, you do have the luxury of being able to plan properly. You do have the luxury of being able to organize things properly and to actually gather the required information and actually carry out an operation properly planned, sustained, and thought through. And I wouldn't even claim that as a luxury. I'd claim that as good sense. And that's the difference in the scenario. And Dieppe was just... It builds on a pattern which was emerging while in Mountbatten's tenure in charge of Amphibious, in charge of the combined forces. And yeah, it's basically a continuation of his tenure. It's not a good point for him. He does better the further he... Honestly, Mountbatten does better the further he gets away from operational planning. The higher he gets up to strategic level rather than operational planning, the further he gets away from actually being involved in any of the frigating details, the better he does. But that's the way it goes sometimes. And you start looking at, again, there were quite a lot of commando raids which were executed very well. And you don't need necessarily... If you're doing commando raid of a couple of hundred troops going in against a target which requires a couple of hundred troops, then you don't need necessarily more than a couple of destroyers to provide fire support. But the moment you're at something which we're doing a reconnaissance of force with 10,500 troops. Hello! So you're going against major target, aren't you? Yes. Okay. So I presume you're going to be allowing time for cruisers to be called in? No, we're going in a month. There's nothing available. We can't clear the minefields enough for it. We don't have the minesweepers or things available, so you can't have anything. No, we're going in a month with 10,500 troops. That doesn't take hindsight to work out it's going to be a bad operation. That's basically common sense. You're sending in a load of troops who haven't got the proper fire support to deal with the target they're engaging. But now, onto the Far East. Onto the Pacific War. And this is a different scenario, again, for defenses and coastal defenses, because the Japanese are... Mostly when they are taking the territories, there isn't much there. There really isn't much there. There are some defense in the Philippines, and they put up a jolly good fight, including the fake battleship. Put up a jolly good fight. But, broadly speaking, there isn't really a lot of defenses when they take them. But they find themselves implementing them, and they are implementing them. And the thing is, they are doing this because it buys them time. They are doing this because they are trying to cost the Americans. You have to remember, the Japanese have an attrition strategy for how to win wars. That's one of their actual core strategic doctrines, attrition of the enemy. usually using distance and guerrilla tactics to attack and attrit larger powers, but they are happy to use islands for it. So you have to look at their coastal defenses and the defenses they implement on those islands on the basis of trying for an attrition strategy. And to start with, they try a defend the beaches strategy. Find that doesn't work. Why? Because, well, the Americans have a habit of turning up with battleships, cruisers, and other things there. They come across with all these capabilities, and they tend to blast away the coast. So that's when the Japanese move to, right then, we're going to do the island defenses inland. We're going to do them where your artillery, where your massive advantage in firepower cannot overwhelm our positions. And that creates its own problems, but it's all about attrition. Next time around, you don't come across as pedantic. It's just, I think the thing you have to remember is I'm not arguing against the commandos on their personal level or their individual bravery or the actions of the men involved who are doing that. I was picking apart Mountbatten, was trying to explain the issues that happened there and how that both did provide information about the Atlantic Wall. It did provide that. You can't argue that against that. But it was a case of I will never... there is going to be loss of life in war. I'm never going to argue that you can fight a war with no loss of life. That's not the case. That's just not the way it is. But I will argue that whilst you cannot take endless time, you do have to make a decision within a certain amount of time. There are times when you have to look at your target and go, am I applying the appropriate amount of time to this? Or am I applying the appropriate amount of force? And if you've got an urgent scenario, yes, do it. But if you're doing an operation like a amphibious raid, like Dieppe, the enemy's not breathing down your neck to do it. There's no pressing, if we don't do this now, we're going to lose this position, this base, this thing. You go do it. But you do it when you've got the information. The thing is, its timeline was in many ways being driven by politics, not by good decision making. And that's my problem with it. They put an artificial timeline due to politics, and then due to that timeline, they couldn't give them necessary support, so all those people get killed. And there are a lot of losses in Dieppe. A lot of losses. Just to give an example on Dieppe, overall, we're talking 900 killed from the Canadians, 250 killed from the British. The US lose 3. The Royal Navy loses a destroyer, 33 landing craft, and 550 killed and wounded. All sorts of things. The Air Force lost all sorts of aircraft as well. You sit there and start going, okay, that's killed. Then you've got 2,500 wounded in the Canadians alone. Another nearly 2,000 captured. Start to look down the figures and you're going, we lost nearly 6,000 personnel. For what? And you start to think then, go, well, hang on, if you'd taken a bit longer to prepare it, you'd have been more sensible. But anyway, getting back to Japan, getting back to the Far East and the Pacific, this is when, especially the older battleships really do shine, because nothing can make your life more painful than an older battleship if it really wants to. If it really wants to make your life painful, it really can make your life painful. And they do. They really do. I'm not sure if it'd call it terraforming so much as geoforming. Now, I have to admit, the list of these, the first operation I've got here is going to be one you've probably never heard of. But this is what I like to do. I like, you know me, I like to chuck in. So I've got a couple which you will have heard of, and one which some of you might know about, but probably a lot of you don't, because it doesn't get talked about a lot. But it's actually very critical, because without it, the Bougainville campaign and the various other areas do not take place. Without it. Okay? Now, I just got flashed that encoding was overloaded. It's saying consider using an easier encoding methodology. Okay, yeah. This poor laptop is really crying out, isn't it? This is going to make the next few weeks fun. We'll see. We'll see how quickly I can get the money together. Oh. Ooh. Turning the video down or using a faster encoding preset. Give it a second. Let's see if that's any better, but if the video footage has gone down terribly, do tell me. Video quality's just completely disappeared. Do tell me, and I'll try and sort it out. But, yeah. We have fun with these things. You're doing alright on Twitch. I'm glad. Doing alright on Twitch. Okay, at times the Japanese must thought the Marines were arriving with 90% of the US at their back. Yeah, that is some of the thing. The US Marines do turn up with quite a lot of heavy force, but in this case, this is the Battle of Treasure Islands is quite a cool one. So, it's mostly the New Zealanders. Okay? Why do I say mostly New Zealanders? Because the operation is carried out by the New Zealand's 8th Infantry Brigade Group. And whilst there are some American troops there as well, most of the American supports come in terms of shipping and a few personnel. But mostly, this is the Americans, how do I put this? Deploying the New Zealanders. Along, and the British also helping to assist to deploy New Zealanders. The invasion basically found the Japanese only had 240-ish personnel on the island, plus 50 aircraft-ish. Ish. Please note, I'm saying ish. The exact figures vary. I've seen some people claim 80 and some people claim 30, and I know Wikipedia says 49. So I've gone for 50-ish. And pretty much, this is to make the various next plans viable. So on 27th of October, they land. 8 vessels assembled for the operation, 8 LCIs, 2 LSTs, and 3 LCTs. And while some reconnaissance operations are being carried out, when they land, they basically, the troops land in the assault, go, hello, what's happening here? What's going on? They land troops from the 29th, the 36th, and the 34th Infantry Battalions. Good units. And this was the first amphibious assault New Zealand had taken part in since the Gallipoli. Okay? It's their second combat operation after the Battle of Vella La Vella. And they're given some supports, mainly a naval construction battalion from the US. It's always nice to have some CBs along. You know, you always want some CBs. And it was the 87th as well. So, you know, let's be honest, it's a good CB unit. The Japanese are pretty much caught by surprise. They try to do fighting. Their aircraft try and do an attack on destroyers. And then once they get ashore, the Japanese try to fight. They try to defend every single blade of grass. But they only have a couple of hundred, roughly 250 personnel, which a couple hundred are actually any good at fighting on the ground. Now, they slowly sort of expand to cover the area, and one of the big problems is that you often hear things about the Japanese going, well, we were still operating on the 12th of November, and you sort of go, yes, there's a small pocket of you somewhere in the middle of the island doing nowhere from anywhere that's interesting that is still there, because the New Zealanders haven't found you yet. It mainly attrits in terms of time, because it takes time to actually find them all. On the little island, the New Zealanders found themselves virtually unopposed. The Japanese tried to hold things, but very quickly they are overwhelmed, and very quickly their personnel just disappear. And this actually gives the Americans and lots of the Allies some sort of idea that maybe this is going to be a quick campaign. Maybe the Japanese are very weak in this area. Maybe they don't have much. Yes, they tried to resist, but there wasn't much in areas where there were areas where there weren't anything, and when they weren't anything, there was of course no resistance. But it was a good operation. And honestly, for the New Zealanders, it was an excellent operation. And it's one of the most forgotten little amphibious assaults in the entirety of the Pacific War. Thank you, Tanif. Now, then we go to the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. Currently, it's at 50% CPU usage. Gilbert Marshall Islands campaign, I wanted to talk about the Battle of Indiwok, because that's kind of an interesting battle. And I picked individual battles for each of these to talk about. Because, Inumitok. I keep calling Entiwok, I don't know why. And it's Eniwok, and Inumitok. It's an interesting battle for many reasons, but the biggest one, I would argue, is that the Japanese forces employed, they hadn't been there in November until November 19. They'd only lied there in November 1942. And they'd only assigned Japanese army forces there in 1943. And they were the first amphibious brigade formed from reservists, from the Manchukuo garrison. And they were assigned in 43, they arrived in January 1944. So they'd literally arrived about a month before the Americans' attack. Okay? So a month before the Americans' attack, you have roughly 3,500 troops landed, personnel landed. They get 9 light tanks, some anti-tank guns, some naval guns, and some mountain guns. Now have a look at that place. Have a look at that map. How are you going to defend that? What is even the point of defending it? Okay, yes, you can go, it's strategic position, it needs to be defended. It's flat! It's tiny islands, it's flat! Literally, battleships can circle you and blast you away with 16-inch guns. Why would you land on it? The thing I'm surprised is the USA actually landed Marines on there. Honestly, if I'd been the Marines, I'd looked at them and gone, but you have a battleship! Just level it! What are these 14-inch and 16-inch guns for, if not to terraform that geography? Why are you sending me? Just blast them! Drop some fuel their explosives if you feel like being particularly productive. Why send me? And again, this is not a critique of the Marines involved. It's just... this is not a place to try and defend. But they do. They do. And they've literally landed in January. And the fact is, once you start looking at the forces deployed and the forces available, and you start going, and your plan is to try and defend all the island, is to try and defend all the beaches, you have literally exposed yourself to everything. First of all, Task Group 58.4 shows up. And they basically go, we have aircraft. We don't want you to have aircraft. They take the airfield out of operation. And also knock out one of the coastal defense guns. And that's on the 16th of February. 17th of February, the invasion fleet shows up. And the bombardment begins. And when I say bombardment, well, the bombardment involves things like the USS Colorado. Yeah, BB-45 with her 16-inch guns. Louisville with her also fairly nice 8-inch guns. Plus Tennessee and Pennsylvania, also battleships. Always nice to have them along. So you have 3 battleships and a heavy cruiser doing bombardment. And then you start, and you also have Indianapolis there as well. Another heavy cruiser wandering along. And there's, when you start looking at the sheer number of forces there, you're going, why are you landing Marines? It's flat. Just squash it. But they do. They carry on, and they do land the Marines. Basically, it's 2 battalions of the 22nd Marine Regiment under Colonel John Walker land on Egby on the 18th of February. They take in some medium tanks and some self-propelled guns. They manage to avoid much resistance on the beach because, except for the southern tip of the island, most of it's been reformed geographically. They capture the airfield, which had been put out of action the previous day. And within an hour, the tanks have actually run out of places to wander around because they'd reached the northern shore. It's actually declared secure by... well, they land at before 9 a.m. in the morning. They've declared it secure by 3 o'clock, although they continue doing mop-up operations. And then they start to clear the other islands. The other islands, they find incomplete concrete pillboxes. Please note that incomplete concrete pillboxes. They haven't actually managed to finish them. The Japanese keep attacking. The Japanese do their best to hold the Americans there for as long as they can, to hold them off as much as they can, but honestly, they are just being overwhelmed. And then you get to Parry. Parry was the most heavily defended. It was smaller than Etiwok, but Parry had the advantage of having 1,100 of the troops garrisoned there. They had 36 heavy grenade launchers, same number of light machine guns, some heavy machine guns, some mortars, some 20mm guns, some mountain guns, and some Type 95 light tanks, 3 of them. And they had managed to build 8 strong points along the beach. They had trenches and foxholes defending them. But again, the Americans turn up with the firepower. They bring in the Tennessee, the Pennsylvania, and the Annapolis and Louisville. Colorado, by this point, is just going, they're not worth my time. And again, it's the 22nd Marines turn up, launching their battalions, and start doing their operations. By 1000 hours, on the 22nd of... 22nd of February? Yeah, 22nd of February. Just checking my details. The Japanese artillery had been completely suppressed by naval bombardment. And by 1200 hours, the 1st Battalion had managed to go from the lagoon side to the ocean side, and the 2nd Battalion had managed to take the northern tip of the island by 1300 hours. The Japanese commander had been killed, they fought to the last man, but honestly, the fact is they weren't in repaired defensive positions, and they were just trying to hold an island, and again, it's a waste of life, it's a waste of anything. The IGA do know how to dig in, it's just, if they only have a month, they can't really dig in that much. And there is not much you can dig in versus when you have not much to dig into when you're facing that amount of firepower. It's just not a good option. It's just not a good option. But conversely, when they do get a chance to dig in, they can be very good. Hello, Killer Ben. Yes. It's just... In that particular place, I would have dug in. Honestly, you sit there and go, yes, your plan is to make the Americans a trip for every inch of ocean they get. But at a certain point, you're just sacrificing personnel for no win. Oh. Imagines the rats get 14-inch shell, mate. Yes, Killer Ben. Isn't this where the bombardment was too close, so they were skipping? They were doing all sorts of things with 14-inch shells because it was so low. The 14-inch shells were really causing issues. They were really, really causing issues. Yeah. Yeah. And then we've got the next one, which is where they dig in, and they really dig in. Pellew Well, how do I put this politely? Yeah, this is one of those campaigns where, when you start to look at it again, the Americans have a lot of forces. They do deploy a lot. It's the 1st and the 81st the 1st Marine Division, the 81st Infantry Division, which are both pretty darn skilled unit formations. The Peleliu garrison that the Japanese have is no slouch either. It includes the 14th Infantry Division, which, if I remember correctly, were a crack unit which came from Manchuria. They were... Yeah, it came from the Kwantung Army in Manchuria. And they had arrived on the island in May, and Colonel Kunio Nakagawa is put in charge of the he's the commander of the division's 2nd Regiment, is in charge of doing the island's defenses. And he's using the latest research that the Japanese have come with, because they've lost the Solomons, Gilberts, Marshalls, and Marineers. They've lost all these, defenses. So the Japanese have actually studied it. And they've decided that no longer should they defend the coast, because their previous doctrine had been to defend the enemy landings on the beach itself. And this had meant that they had been surprisingly very vulnerable to naval bombardment. And whereas Plan Z, and yes, the Japanese had their own Plan Z, which had been the idea that the Navy would respond and come and support them, had meant you defend every inch to buy as much time as possible because the Navy's coming. Once you realise the Navy isn't coming, you now are changing to a model of, we're going to attrit and make the Americans lose as many personnel as possible. Which means we're no longer contesting in a way which is going to try and keep the naval forces around. We want to contest in a way which is going to keep the troops bogged down and dying. It's not nice, but it's functional. And it is very functional. Douse the island. There are so many options. Yeah, there are so many things you. Peleliu is. Look, where is the book? I have quite a few of the personal accounts by various US Marines which are written for their experiences during World War II, because they're really usually pretty well written and pretty interesting to read. And as long as you remember their personal accounts of the war, you're fine. It's when you start taking them as verbatim, as this is verbatim, this is exactly what happened on strategic levels. You go, what they're seeing is what they remember from their own perspective, what happened. And it's going to be true, but it's going to be from their perspective of where they were and what they remember. You're fine. Now, Peleliu is described as steep, twisting coral ridges. And, yeah, basically they just start constructing bunkers like this. It's a honeycomb interlocked bunker system, and it's specifically designed to not facilitate things like a banzai charge, because they'd been decided to be wasteful of manpower and ineffective. Yeah, the Japanese felt the banzai charge was not a good idea. Human wave attacks were not considered sensible operations for them to do. It might have worked against the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War. It might have worked in some of their operations against the Chinese. It does not work against the Americans. It did not work against the Soviet Union. It was not a good system overall for modern warfare. And basically, the idea is you are using these troops, these personnel from the Kwantung Army, to try and buy more time to build stronger defenses back in Japan, to make the cost of invading the home islands higher. So quite literally at this point, the Japanese have shifted from attrition warfare to attrit the enemy down to a point at which they can defeat them, i.e. destroy their ships, etc. and these things, to the point at which they can defeat them. Which is why you do the coastal defenses, to keep the battleships there, providing the firepower, so your aircraft can go in and try and sink the battleships and sink the enemy warfighting vessels, which are primarily engaging your shore positions to support their troops and get them ashore, to defending internally to attrit the forces, to tie the forces down, so that they can't use those forces to go and attack Japan, because they're supporting and sustaining the fight on the island. And that buys time for you a different way. Both are forms of attrition. Okay? Please note it. Think of the first one as, we keep the bombardment fleet there. They're going to be, while they're bombarding us, we're going to know where they are. It's going to make it easy for aircraft to find them, so they're going to be able to fly out and attack these. And it's going to be easier for a carrier battle group to come and fight, a carrier group for the Kido Butai to come and kill them, or a battle group, the battle fleet to come and kill them, because they're going to know where they are. Well, when that doesn't work anymore, when that's no longer a viable option, they're not coming, you change to a different methodology, because that way gets your troops killed quickly, overall, by the sheer firepower. Ralph, in real life it was a shock, Banzai was a shock tactic that only worked against poorly trained, motivated and equipped troops. Usually it works best against tired troops in the middle of the night. Doesn't necessarily need to be poorly trained or motivated, but if they are tired and it's the middle of the night, it's basically the same thing as being poorly trained and motivated. You're usually going, oh, fudge! Ah! Good lord, they're all shouting and charging at me. And where's my command? Where's my NCOs? What's happening? And in those few seconds of confusion they by themselves, they can get close and do lots of damage. They had turned mines, which had been built as part of the phosphate system and phosphate refinery, into some of their defense positions. And that's the other trouble you have with Pilu. It's been honeycombed for a while. It's been a mine. It's been literally a force have been doing it. So their South Seas Development Company, which had been established to try for the sugar industry, but was also, how to put this, hunting for phosphate deposits on Pellew, doing all sorts of mining there, and had built infrastructure that was wharves, etc., which allowed you to bring a lot of stuff in. So Pellew was very different. You were able to defend and bring stuff in it. And they brought in engineers, and so you'd have, the caves were fitted with sliding armoured steel doors, allowing them to both fire out of them, but also provide concealment and protection for both artillery, machine guns, and all the other troops themselves, most importantly. They altered cave entrances and slanted them so that if there was a grenade or a flamethrower attacks, those attacks would go off in the wrong direction and wouldn't penetrate into the cave. They did a whole tunnel and trench system throughout central Pellew, which meant they could evacuate, recover positions. You always have interior lines of communication so that their troops could maneuver freely. So you could be bombarding them using artillery, everything, and their personnel could still move around fairly safely, fairly quickly, fairly freely. They also stuck in a lot of mortars, a lot of anti-aircraft cannon, but it was their anti-aircraft cannon, and they used their light tanks, they used their anti-aircraft units. They almost got larger tanks than light tanks, but those were being saved for the home islands. You have to remember, the Japanese do have tanks, they just don't use them as freely as everyone else does because of difficulty of getting enough of them. It's always difficulty in getting enough of them. They didn't, just because they weren't going to actively defend the beaches, didn't mean they didn't put anything on the beaches. They filled them with obstacles, which were mines, and they buried artillery shells with fuses exposed. They did all sorts of things which were designed to try and rip the bottoms of landing craft. And there was a battalion along the beach to do initial defense. But they were under orders that they were to delay, not to prevent, and they were to withdraw. They also, how do I put this politely? None of the Japanese planners or officers involved expected garrison to survive if Pellew was attacked. And that changes your approach to things. If you don't expect to survive, if you expect to die, and you've given yourself up to that, it suddenly frees you to do a lot of interesting thinking about how you're going to do things. It's not necessarily a good mindset to go in, because it might make you, how to put this, less judicious with the value of life, which can lead to some very faulty thinking. Really does lead to some very faulty thinking. But it also means that you are, in some ways, freed from the burden of worrying about risk of things. So you're going to try some random scary things because, well, you're going to die anyway, so you might as well give it a go. Lions, there are lots of examples of troops, and I've given an example before, especially of various books where troops would often say they preferred a destroyer's fire support than a battleship's, because you'd get direct fire support from the destroyer. The battleship you'd share and would often usually be engaging strategic targets. Saying that, though, occasionally it's kind of like if you get on the air support radio and there's a B-52 up there and it's available. If you get on the fire support radio and you're calling in, we need fire support, is any ship available? And the response is, hello, this is USS Texas, or hello, this is HMS Warspite, send us the coordinates. You're not disappointed. But still, more often than not, you can call on a destroyer far easier than you can a battleship. Sound is stuttering. Is that just me, or is it Alex's laptop giving up the ghost? Between our two laptops, they could both be giving up the ghost, my friend. Brew ships is going to be fun, and the recording the videos is going to be even more fun, and it's great fun having the camera, the laptop there. So I'm looking at the laptop, and it looks like I'm looking away from you all. But I have the big screen there, so I can see everything, and I might try and swap things around, I'm not sure, I'll try and work it out. But that could lead to other confusion, so I don't want to do that. It's fun. I wonder if I could flip the laptop over completely and turn its screen off and use it completely, just the processing unit, but upside down. Tempting. That could allow it to cool itself even quicker. No, Lions, don't... Look, no one worries. The thing is, I will sort I will be sorted out. I will sort something out. I will... As said, it will work. The laptop will work for long enough, hopefully, until I can get the money together to fix the PC, and then new laptop is going to be a thing of, yeah, but at currently moment, as I explain to people, I don't know, the reason I am so short of cash at the moment is because we are running 2 houses, because they have one in Epsom still hasn't sold, and you can be not doing okay, but the way we've had to move house has caused us to be cash flow. We're currently, on paper, very, very rich because we own 2 houses. But sustaining those houses is extortionate. Yeah. Anyway, back to the Pellew campaign and away from my laptop still making interesting noises. I'm going to be cleaning out the fan again later. I cleaned the fan out this morning. I'll clean it out again later. When you consider the sheer amount of forces and the sort of the luminaries who are being sent to do this. The Marines there are under command of Julian C. Smith, and he's in charge of the 3rd Amphibious Corps. Major General Royce Geiger. Major General William H. Rupert's in charge of the 1st Marine Division. And, once you start looking at the various forces involved, oh my lord, is it a list of the skilled and the capable. It really is. And it takes a month, landing to 15th September to 15th October 1944. And the Americans quite quickly gain control of the airfield. Basically, 16th of September, they pretty much land and take the airfield. And very quickly, they get control of the lowland territories. And when you're looking at this whole map, you start to realize they really do get control of the lower areas very, very quickly. And then they take control of the northern tips of the island. They get Mount Amagami and Mount Camillanui quite quickly as well. They're mostly by the 30th of September. But do you realize that the mountain area is what holds them up? The Umbrogal Mountains. So they might have the lowlands, they might have the areas, but getting to that mountain fortress is what takes the time. It's what cost them. And it's these areas which actually start to take the casualties. The Japanese had great fire discipline. They would only hit when they could inflict maximum casualties. And, the Japanese are not bothered about things. They start to take aim at stretcher bearers. They are trying to take them out because they know that draws in more personnel. It also damages the medic supply. And medics are a rare and valuable resource, an important resource, because if you want to live, you want your medic to get to you quickly. This is when the US Marines start to build 2-man fighting hulls, because they need to have one asleep and one to keep watch for the infiltrators. But, because they're trying, the Japanese keep trying to infiltrate the American lines at night in small groups to cause maximum damage. They're not doing a banzai charge. They're doing a very small tactical commando raid in many regards. And, the classic example is Bloody Nose Ridge, where they are the 1st Battalion of the 1st Marines are attacking up Hill 100. They suffer 71% casualties. And on the last, one of the last sort of after 6 days of fighting, it's, there's one company, led by Captain Everett Pope, I think, from my notes, he has 90 men left. He goes to seize what he thinks is Hill 100, and he finds after he's reached what he thought was the crest of the hill, it's actually just a ridge. And there is another ridge beyond that, which is occupied by more Japanese defenders. And he's trapped at the base of that ridge. They run out of ammunition. They're having to fight with knives, fists, throwing coral rock, empty ammunition boxes at the Japanese. And eventually, they evacuate the position the next day. That one got Pope the Medal of Honor. It is a brutal, brutal fight the whole way through. And if I told you at the end there are 12,000 Japanese personnel dead and 360 prisoners. And the US have lost roughly 2,000 dead, 8,500 wounded and injured. Yes, it's an American victory, but it is a grinding 2 months, 1 week, and 15 days. No, 5 days. Sorry, my maths went wrong in my head. It's just... the whole thing is built around, we have this great big castle and you have to take it, otherwise you can't operate aircraft from this island. And that's the key point. You let the Americans take the airfield, great. For the Americans, they've got the airfield. Terrible is, that airfield is dialed in and well in range of Japanese artillery if they want to fire on it. So you have to take them out. And to take them out, you need to clear every stretch of that mountain, every stretch of that ridgeline. And that's a nightmare. That is a nightmare. It is. Everyone, call for this fire support response. Hello, this is Atrus Warspite. What geography offends you? Neither in configuration or problem dust. Yeah, fine, good. I'd say if you get a battleship for fire support, you probably wonder which deity decided to bless you with this gift. Well, the other thing is, just remember, at one point there was a German tank company making its way on D-Day quite happily. And then they were no more. Because the battleship spotted them. There were other tanks. There was one tank which decided to try and solo a destroyer. It was not pretty. Turns out, when you've got 8 guns, which are all bigger than its one gun, you can kind of do nasty things to it. Not an entire company of tanks in one salvo, but, you know, it gets worse. Lions, could they not have starved them out if they're willing to take their time, or were they too well supplied? Too well supplied, but also... the thing is, starving them out can sound effective, but it's going to take time. And time doesn't play in your favour. You want to get that base, because one of the reasons you're getting that base is the island hopping campaign. One of the reasons you're getting that base is you're wanting to get closer and closer to Japan to support air raids on Japan. And you need that airfield up and running for that. My Highness, ironically, this was a fight that Halsey recommended not engaging in. Well, yes. If your enemy has a well-supplied, strong point that cannot actually reach out and get you, ignore it and move on. Honestly, it was a perfect site for a air attack to blast out to the air infrastructure, and then moving on. But it was needed by the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Army Air Corps, to help their operations. I think that's one of the assessments at the time, so that's why they went for it. Oh yeah, but Lions, the classic example is, I think, the most junior commander who got a response from a battleship on D-Day, and I seem to remember reading this book, so I could be completely remembering it wrong, because I can't remember which book it's in, but it is in one of the books I've got about D-Day, I'm sure, was a company commander was dead, and one of the deputy platoon commanders was the senior capable officer of actually doing anything, and gets hold of the radio and is trying to radio to the command ship to request fire support. The radio, for some reason, doesn't get through to the command ship, but is picked up by another voice. And if I remember correctly, it was the Texas. I think it was the USS Texas. I think it's one of the stories about the USS Texas. And they're basically going, we're being heavily pinned down here, this position, we can't... And Texas had just finished its fire mission, and they just swiveled their guns round and went, boom. And the fire position, which had been holding up this company and causing all these casualties, disappeared. And so, yeah, it does depend on what you're dealing with, but let's be honest, if you're in that situation, USS Texas must have seemed like a gift from God. You've got officers, you've got all your personnel suffering casualties, and you get Texas online. You're not supposed to get Texas online, but you get Texas online, and Texas just goes, tell us where you need hit. They dial it in. But Texas is the ship which literally decided that, you know, when World War I they used to flood ships to try and get better range? Yeah. On the monitors? Yeah. And the pre-dreadnoughts? Yeah. Can we do that? We're not supposed to. We're gonna do it. But yeah, so I put Napoleon to the Falklands War here for operations, because you have to remember it's been the same problem the whole way through history when it comes to us talking about coastal defences and defence of the sea. And the problem has always been the same thing. You are trying to increase the cost. You're trying to increase the risk of doing an operation versus the reward. Is it worthwhile spending enough to overcome that level of risk? Is the reward worth it? So the risk means you have to increase cost to accomplish it. Is that cost worth spending in view of the reward? Often I talk about when we're talking about air defense at sea and engaging, drones and cheap things with multi-million-pound missiles. People go, that's pointless. That's an expensive waste of money. And you go, well, no. How much is the target that the drone's going to hit worth? What's the damage that could cause? So that's the thing: is what's the damage it can cause worth? If that's worth billions, then spending millions to defend it is fine. That's justifiable. Doesn't matter if the threat against it is worth tens of thousands. Doesn't matter. Those millions are justifiable when defending the billions. Because of the cost-benefit scenario. And it's the same with an amphibious operation. It's the same with coastal defences. And Napoleon was the guy who tried it first to try and turn the whole of Europe into a wall against the British Navy. It didn't work that well because the Royal Navy has a habit of A, turning up in places and paying money for food and drink, and creating friends with locals even in France, and B, has a habit of turning up in places where you're not strong. They do have a habit of doing proper research. And that's the thing. And again, if we go to the Falklands War, it's a good example. The Argentines do chuck in defence. One of the things often people say, they don't really defend the islands. Well, they don't. They think the British will do what they've been advised by their trainers who've been training amphibious warfare, most of the Americans, that the British will do a coup de main, because that's the American doctrine at that time for how you deal with these sorts of operations. You go straight for the target. So they've got to put all their defences, everything around Stanley, because that's where they think the British were sharp. Because that's what they did. That's what the Americans have taught them, because that's what the Americans do, because they show up with overwhelming fire support, firepower, and overwhelm their targets and then do a coup de main, because that's their doctrine at that time. Okay? Their doctrine at that time. There's a relevant phraseology here. The British go off and go off and land somewhere else. They go off and land in San Carlos Bay. Why? Because they can. Because there's virtually nothing there to stop them. And once they're ashore, they can then maneuver across the land to get to where they need to go, and they can support and sustain that once they're ashore. And the thing is, if you'd actually looked at the British force structure and realised that, well, if you're dealing with anti-ship missiles like the Exocet, rock beats missile. So I'm probably going to want somewhere where I can surround myself with rock if I'm going to be within land-based missile range and they're going to know where I am. Even today, it's one of the interesting things when people talk to me about missiles, and I go, well, think about modern missile systems and think about them in the same scenario as Falklands War. Look at me and go, what do you mean? Well, how many missile systems do we have today that actually we would like to reliably send fire at targets the other side of a mountain range, so they would go over a mountain, pop up, and then engage their target? And pick out their target. Not GPS coordinate target, but an actual target, we know where it is. And we'll find it to seek ahead. Because there's going to be refraction from radar, there's going to be all sorts of issues. And there are missiles which will do it, but there's also a thing of you're going to lose some of those missiles just to attrition and maneuvering through the terrain. And whilst it's right, as Steve Clarke just put, if you're trying to defend everything, you defend everything, you defend nothing. That is true. You need to concentrate your forces somewhere to defend places. But the thing is, I would say I would return to the idea of the Martello Towers. Has always been my consistent and modern approaches to that. Having a small amount of forces deployed around areas as tripwires that are going to hold the enemy up for a while. The example would be in Cold War, a lot of the scenarios are based around having an anti-tank team in a light vehicle like a Statch Land Rover or a Jeep. And they would fire their missile, retreat to another position, fire another couple of missiles, maybe, and then retreat, and just keep doing that in front of the enemy as a form of attrition. You need 3 or 4 people in that vehicle for that to make that viable. You need one person to be firing a missile loader. You need probably someone who would be sitting on a light machine gun, but also acting as navigator to make sure they're moving right, and the driver. That's probably what you need. You need a 4-person, 4-person crew, depending on your perspective. I would say 4 would be slightly better than the 3, but we can. So, if you really want to make fun, you have a couple of vehicles involved, so they leapfrog each other. So one can be engaging the enemy while the other one's maneuvering and setting itself up, and then that one withdraws, and this one provides cover. Or you can even do 3 or 4 vehicles. You can make it as complicated as you like. But you don't really need it to be that much more than that. You can do similar things with coastal defense these days. As I've tried to explain, the thing about coastal defense ranges is they've got bigger. The systems have got longer range. So how you fortify, how you approach modern fortifications of sea, and how you should be defending your coastline has changed. What you're going to need has changed. Air defense missiles are as much a part of it as anti-ship missiles. They really are. Because there's no point trying to mount a defense of the coast if you can't defend against the air threat coming in. The lesson from World War II is that when you're building these coastal defenses, A, it's going to depend on how you're crewing them, but also it's going to depend on how you're supporting them, and what layers you're putting in behind them, what layers you're able to put in behind them, and how you're structuring. There's a reason why the Allies do not land in the Pas de Calais. There's a reason why the Allies do not go for a port like Dieppe, the take on the first day. Because they know they'll fail. They know they'll take a huge amount of casualties, and they won't get anywhere because those are going to be heavily defended positions. So they're going outside them. And that's the thing where you need those those self-sustaining defensive positions that can hold up the enemy. It can cause them trouble. It's how things work. No one likes surprise paratroopers or helicopters. No, they don't. They don't. These days, helicopters are far more annoying. It's one of those things of when we're starting to look back at history, it's very easy. And again, the other problem you have when you talk about the history of coastal defenses is what you remember are the amphibious operations which succeeded. You don't remember the amphibious operations which were never mounted because they didn't have enough force available. And the ones which failed are fewer. But people go, well, look at Gallipoli. That shows it couldn't be done in World War I. But World War II, they do all this, so it shows it can no longer be achieved. So they go, Gallipoli failed because of reasons. World War II, they didn't mount a lot of operations, and they mounted the operations they did in the way they did because of the way the coastal defense were put up. Like a lot of things in warfare, these systems, these implementations are about giving your opponent dilemmas. They have not got a good option. They cannot take a port, so they have to land some other port and work out how they're going to deal with their resources and getting the resources across. Let's be honest. If you're the Germans this is what I'd like to bring up is, how many German war planners, when they're thinking about defenses and how they'd lay out their coastal defenses, think of something like the Mulberry Harbour's going to come along? Think about that. Think about the sheer amount of resources, effort, and engineering that has to go into building a mobile frigating harbour. Wait, you mean there's a reason you wouldn't want to sail major naval asset also? No, there are many reasons why I would want to do it. But that's the thing. We talked about Norway already at the beginning, and the fact is, if Oslofjord, if the Norwegians had actually had their formations actually set up, they would have massacred a lot of Germans. And when you start looking at the whole of all these sort of options from those Henrican castles, from the things the Chinese built on their various rivers, the Japanese castle construction is really cool. I'm looking forward to seeing that in Japan, hopefully. All those things, all of it, comes down to giving your opponent dilemmas and difficulties. Anyway, I'm going to, before I start repeating myself, and I was coming close to that, I felt, in that summary, I'm going to say questions, and I'll do questions for roughly half an hour, if that's okay. And then I will go check on everything else in the house and check on the family, and then I'll pop into Discord for a bit. I think I fancy doing Discord for a bit this evening. I'm not sure how long I'll be on, but it's It'll give the computer a little time to calm down before I'm on there. So it's about half-hour questions. How is everyone doing? How goes the world? Hello, Twitch and YouTube. Hello, all of you. And I did that in alphabetical order before anyone from the Overlords checks. It's literally alphabetical order. How is everyone doing today? That's a good question to start with. Thank you, Lions. Thank you. I will check the DMs in a bit. Quite alright, good. What is the most impressive series of coastal fortifications you're aware of for their respective era? Okay. Honestly, the Swedish ones are pretty darn good. The Swedish ones are pretty darn impressive. And I would say they are pretty good for their era in the Swedish Empire. But I have a real soft spot for the Henrican forts. I do. I know it's silly. I know it's very British of me, but the Henrican forts, mainly because, okay, if I explain this, my mum and aunt, as I've said before, are non-identical twins. They are, you know, they're the twins, but not identical. And when I was young and I first saw St. Maur's and Pendennis, and of course they are both Henrican forts. They're built to a similar model, but they are different. They reminded me of my mum and my aunt. They're non-identical twins. And at one point, I used to call I used to call them that's why I used to call them the twins, and a few other things as well. So you know that's why those forts are always going to be special to me, if that makes sense. But yeah, lots of rain transfer. That's always good. You escaped training rune on. That's not necessarily so good. But are you getting paid for 5 10s? That's the point. If 4 10s means you have tomorrow off, that's good run on. But if you're going to be doing 5 10s, I'm hoping you're getting paid for all 5 of those 10s. The Brook. What technologies were in development that could have made defending or attacking a coast easier during World War II? Radar control gunfire. If you'd been getting that going, you'd have been really useful. In terms of for both sides, that would have made both defending more dangerous, but attacking also more accurate. So it's on both sides. It's going to rack up the cost. Steve Clarke. Like so, if the job of your amphibious commander is to take as few risks as possible, well, I'm a car for the land in Incheon. Oh, amphibious commanders often take risks, but there's a lot of mitigations in Incheon. You look at the amount of fire support they take along and how they're planning it, and also what's actually there. Iron is well known for their skill, their land redecoration. Tehe leveled one building in Semilina during some war in the past. Yeah, The Royal Navy does like... all Royal Navies do like land decoration. Also, there are certain destroyers which I swear have personal vendettas against trains. They really do. Why did Argentina think the British had the same amphibious warfare doctrine in the US? Looked at Book of Mortis this morning about carriers and Eastern Falklands. Pretty much, the Argentine doctrine. The question was, well, they'd asked their American advisors, who didn't really know much about British doctrine, and went, well, the British are partnered with you in NATO, aren't they? Yes. So they use the same doctrine, right? Well, in theory, yes. So that was their assessment, but because the theory is the doctrine development in NATO was supposed to be was combined and everyone. But whilst both ran off Allied Tactical Publications number 8, ATP8, for amphibious operations, in terms of their command and structuring doctrine, their operational doctrine was different, because if you look at the Royal Marine, the first clue would have been, look at the formation of Royal Marines Brigade, and then look at the formation of a US Marines Regiment. And look at their structure and differences and what they get, what's assigned to them versus what they how they are organized, how they are built, what units they're built around, how they're formed versus what they're not built around. And you start to realize, well, hang on, these are quite different units. They're going to be operated in a different way, and that's the reality. Same penguins, thank you, same penguins. It sounds like you do need the chocolate penguins, maybe the fluffy kind, the feathery kind, but I think you need the chocolate kind. If you need them, if I'm on your mental health break, you need the chocolate kind of penguins. So send the details to Discord, and we'll see if someone can't send you some chocolate penguins. So I always feel with your name, you deserve them. Actually, has there ever been an engagement with Coastal Fort that had rotating turrets as a main armament? There have been several engagements with interesting forts, so have a look at the Crimean War and some of the turrets which are involved there and some of the fortifications. There have been lots of interesting fortification battles over the years, and yeah, it depends on what you're talking about in terms of rotating turret. I think there was a couple of battles with the pop-up turrets as well, historically, and the pop-up guns. There's been lots of interesting ideas for coastal defense over the years. Lions, could we have ever had the British fortifications able to help the invasions across the Channel? I'm fairly sure the long range there was a cross-channel duel of big guns firing across the Channel at various points between British and German positions in World War II. I'm fairly sure they were doing interesting things. Fort Drum does get a lot of fun. Let's be honest, it's what I call the fake Philippine battleship. Ralph, did the US ever consider building tracks for railway artillery in the Philippines to get around the no fortifications thing? Claim it's not a fortification, it's infrastructure. Honestly, they should have done, but they don't seem to have. But honestly, that's probably because they're honestly looking at trying to... If the Japanese had waited about another couple of years, the Americans might not have even been in the Philippines. They're honestly trying to... There was honestly quite a large movement to get out of there. Yeah, Summer, what would have been the outcome of the Second World War without American help? If the Americans hadn't joined the war as an active participant, then the only scenario that happens is if the Japanese haven't gone to war. In which case, honestly, it's going to be interesting, but if they're doing their supply stuff, then the British Empire has enough resources. It can probably carry out what it needs to do to win in North Africa. The Soviets are going to be still fighting in the Eastern Front, and as long as they can supply and sustain them as much as they can, then things get interesting, and it's a whole different matter. If the Americans are not even doing the whole, we're not even building stuff, supplying route, that gets more complicated. I honestly, I don't think Germany ever takes Britain or anything like that. I think you have a far more interesting timetable in terms of operations and sustainment of Britain. I still think probably the Mediterranean North Africa campaign work out the same way, but maybe take a bit longer. The reason I say that is because at a certain point, the yards which are being built in Canada and Australia and India start to bear fruit with resources. And the big thing, which isn't deployed much outside North Africa campaign, of course, is the Indian Army in European theatre. And there's all sorts of forces which the Empire has at its disposal to deploy. But the moment the Japanese get involved and get involved and attack the Americans are going to be in the war. So you have to have the Americans both go completely isolationist and B not get attacked by the Japanese. Britain wouldn't have sent troops to join the Soviet army. It was not a, how do I put this? It was looked into at points during World War II, and it was decided that the two forces would not necessarily work well together from a, what was the phrase used? Force discipline perspective. The Soviet approach to force discipline versus the American approach. It wasn't even a worry of political ideologies infected them. It was literally force discipline, which was the problem they worried about. Look it up, Lions. There is actually, I think, a Wikipedia page about the coastal, the cross-channel gun duels going on. What is displacement sand and deep of Fort Drum? A lot of concrete. I have no idea how much all that concrete weighs. I'd have to do a lot of maths on that one to try and figure it out. That's 600. Why is it overlooked that in Korea MacArthur went with a plan just so crazy it might work, and it did? Because MacArthur never presented his plans as being just crazy enough to work. Take care, Mole's Revenge. MacArthur always tried to present his plans as obvious logical genius, not as a stroke of nuttiness. And that's a problem. That really is a problem. Because it undervalues the man in some regards, because he does sometimes have these complete nutty responses that actually do work. But also, he has the habit of not giving any credit to his staff, which I find annoying. I really do find that annoying. Because I always believe these things are team efforts. They really are. Oh. I have videos from Glyn. Wondering why my phone was vibrating. I have a video come through from Glyn. That's Glenn Stewart, the science fiction author I sometimes talk about, and who's sometimes on a good friend is on the channel, who we abducted in Canada, and who might be joining us in Japan if that all goes through. Hopefully. Thanks, Sarah. Different question, I know, but thanks for your honest answer. I try my best, but it's one of those things of you have to look at the exact circumstance. You always have to look at these things in the context of what happened and how they would happen. And that's usually the problem. It's when people, what annoys me is when people do alternate histories and they don't present the context of why it happened, because that would often explain a lot. If the Americans just go completely isolationist, don't get involved at all, and don't get attacked by Japan, yeah. And they don't get involved in World War II. But also, that's going to have changed some scenarios, because the Americans have gone completely isolationist. Then they probably weren't involved in the London Naval Treaty. In fact, if they've gone completely isolationist, there's a good reason they wouldn't get it. You don't get involved in those sort of treaties, because they restrict you too much and they bind you into an international system where you are partially responsible for upholding it. So you don't want to get involved in those treaties. So that's true isolationism. And if there's no second London Naval Treaty, and there's the consequence of that, then you have a whole different scenario you're dealing with. Mark Highness, it wasn't McArthur's plan though. He is great at taking credit for other men's brilliance. Yeah. That's the thing, he never acknowledges his staff. Runon, what's a defense would be sufficient to stop a properly motivated amphibious warspite in Texas? Look, in a nice way, if you manage to attach tracks to Warspite in HMS Warspite in USS Texas in their battleship form, so they could drive on land, good luck. But the one problem I do see with that is they will have an area where they cannot engage because they don't have any guns for it. So you'll need to have, I don't know, 6-inch guns or something which can pop out the bottom of the hull and engage targets, or the ability to fire torpedoes perhaps at tanks. Don't think that would work in that time period, but they would be beautiful, but also they would need their own escorting armor divisions. But with an escorting armor division, that would scare the bejesus out of anyone. But that's often the problem people forget when they're talking about, let's put a battleship on tracks and send it show you something. But the trouble is, all its guns are up at the top, and that means, and they have a limit of how far they can fire down, which creates a minimum zone where they cannot engage the enemy. And so you need to somehow find a way of putting guns on the hull that pop out. Amphibious Texas balls like spontaneous grenadier guns. They might do, but in talking in actual design terms. No, they also don't have any armor on them. No, but they have thick enough steel and usually multiple hulls on the bottom. It's sort of multi-hulled at the bottom. That as long as their tacks and their tracks raised up, I don't think anything short of a very big mine is not really going to affect them. And you have to remember, they also do have an actual sort of curve and shape to them, so that to deflect blast damage from a mine, especially if they have the size they are. So, yeah, and also they're that big enough, the tracks be that massive that probably the mines will go off long before they even reach them. It's just yeah. It's interesting. You'd have to redesign the ship to an extent, but you could build something like that. Oh, the US. Let's put it this way: there are few countries on Earth which truly could pursue an isolationist, autarkic approach to the world. The US is probably one of the few who could actually possibly pull it off. I'm thinking in my head going through the list of resources, but the thing is, what would they have to sacrifice to go truly autarkic? And truly isolationist is perhaps beyond the pale of what they're prepared to sacrifice. And the thing is, they've built themselves such a good position in the global economy that abandoning it doesn't make a lot of sense. But we'll see what happens and what. Look, the thing about being a historian is you're often watching things and going, is this a repeat of a very old mistake, or is this a new mistake? Because very often what any politician is doing, and any leader, and I say this as someone who occasionally is interested in flirts with the idea of actually going into politics, because I think I would hope I'd be a partially informed person, and I do sometimes consider problems we have in politics are the lack of informed people. Having met a lot of politicians, or people who actually go and do the research, but we'll leave that to one side. The thing is, to do the modern scenario you're dealing with, we are all dealing with a world which is very different than we necessarily imagine. The example I tend to give, though, is when we're talking about sort of world economies and economics, is Napoleon. Napoleon couldn't really understand debt. Okay? For him, what you could spend was what you could tax, and you only can tax physical things. The British government were usually fighting their wars with him based off debt. So it didn't depend on how much money they had coming in tax revenue. What mattered was how good their credit was in terms of how they could fund the conflict. So, as long as they maintained good credit, they had money to fight and build the ships and do the operations they needed to do to fight the war. And yes, you try and keep the tax revenue going, you try and keep the government going, but honestly, the credit rating fluctuates less than a tax income. Because if you think about it, government treats tax income, well, that's going to depend on the profits. And if you're getting a lot of your taxes coming from farmers and farm owners, well, you get the money in when they sell the produce. But that's, you're trying to have to do an income tax, or you've got a sales tax going on, or sort of things, but, you might have an import-export taxes, tariffs, all sorts of different things, but you have to be careful about how you apply that. So yeah, it was the thing that, he called Britain a nation of shopkeepers and bookkeepers. That was sensible. That was true. Britain was. The thing is, they had a lot of accounting techniques to make sure the British government looked like its credit rating was always good, so it was getting in debt, it was getting the money in to be able to fight the wars, and then it paid off the war and paid off the cost after the war. Many people suggesting hedgehog for close-in defense. Oh. But there are things which are better even than hedgehog for close-in defense. Squid launcher, anyone? a squid bomb hitting a tank. That would not be good. How do you cool the condensers? That would require some effort, but there are ways you could think about it. Combine the steel from USS Texas and HMS Warspite into a, say, modern warship. Why would you build something that with that particular personality combination? Do you call that tech spite or war Warass? Warsass? Warass? I'm not sure. Either way, I don't want to fight that. Oh, and speaking of that, watch my Patreon, because there is going to be, when the Patreon vote goes up on Sunday, there is going to be a little video attached. You're going to love it. It never ceases to amaze me that when a politician suggests a very easy way to fix things, people actually believe them instead of going, it's so easy, why did no one else do it? Yeah, look, let's put it this way. The question I usually ask whenever I hear someone suggesting on news, it's very easy, we can fix it this way. So I go, think about your own lives. How often is the easy solution the correct solution for complicated problems? What should I have for dinner is an easy option. What do I have in the fridge? What do I have in the cupboards? Do I have anything in my account for a takeaway? That's it. That's a very easy option. What should I do about the mortgage for my house? That's a complicated question with lots of variable options. There is no easy answer. Next spider Warsas. For us. Yeah, that is how you get robot overlords. It really is. Anyway, what else have we got coming up? I think next week, if I'm not mistaken, we have the Royal Navy College, Dartmouth, Britannia. And if I'm not mistaken, the Thursday video. If I go check my options and what I have going on. Oh god, encoding overloaded. I'd also like to point something out. I'm not sure who, for what reason, but it seems out that the people who did Stargate are nicer than the people who do Star Trek. Oh yes, leadership of the 1930 London Naval Treaty is next week. That's the Thursday video. Leadership of the 1930 London Naval Treaty. I haven't programmed in the Thursday videos for May and June yet. We'll see. We'll see. Anyway. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I'm going to go and pop back on Discord in a bit, but I hope you enjoyed this evening. Sorry about any video quality issues. As I said, until I can get the tower working again, I'm using a laptop, and yeah, I'm going to clean the laptop up and do a lot of work on it. Probably later tonight, and we'll see what we can get it sorted with. Because there's a few things I'd like to do to make it a bit healthier. But I have cleaned out the fan already today, but it seems to have not worked that well. Yeah, that's Samarna. That is the case. There is a lot of silliness going on with the procurement. There really is. We have the same operational commitments, but we have a lot less vessels to do them with. And the thing is, look, in the nicest way, Britain should have kept to a strategy of keeping something under construction the whole time. But yeah, trying to explain that to politicians, because you have to remember, in the 1990s and 2000s, we were still firmly in the future wars are going to be wars of choice scenario when we choose to take part in them. And it's going to take a while for us to build ourselves out of that trap we built for ourselves. It's going to take a while for it. Ah, the Collins, they were lovely ones, boats. Oh, they were. They're still lovely boats, but, you know, they need to be replaced. Anyway, take care, everyone. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And hope to see some of you on Discord in a bit. As I said, going to check on everything. Thank you, Melanie, Mariner, John Shea, Funko. Thank you. trying to scroll up through this chat. Thank you to Jonathan Moon. Thank you to Lions. Thank you to Killerbin. Thank you to Duke of Petchington. Thank you to Ralph, Steve Clarke, Raptorat, Paul Amos, Malgar. Send Penguins, of course. Thank you. And 96831, Melanie 1640. Thank you, everyone. Costa Drowsiness, thank you. All the people who've been chatting away. Runon, Steve, Leslie. I'm now running out of chat because the poor laptop is now crying. It really is crying. Peter Dawson, thank you. And thank you, everyone who basically has been here watching and hope you enjoyed. And Tanif Elika, thank you again for that super chat. Very kind of you. Everything this moment is now going towards the probably new PC fund. Oof. Oh, good lord. It works out, though, when you do the maths and you realise how much I use a computer for and how much the time a computer spends running a day. It does work out, you know, pretty good, but it's still... sheesh. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed. Da 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 da.